across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And Tiffin, still don't know what that is. Welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Jonathan Garlis. Back very soon right here at the home of common sense here on Talk. Loads to get through this afternoon. As we were just mentioning, there, asylum seekers staying in taxpayer-funded hotels are swiping thousands of pounds worth of designer gear from top stores, contributing to a shoplifting epidemic that has seen nearly 3 thefts a minute reported by retailers. I put this up there as a really serious crime. I'm asking you, how do we solve this problem? And the answers might be obvious, really. But look, let's have a think about it. Let's have a conversation. How do we solve this? It comes as Epping's police commissioner has written to the Home Secretary demanding the closure of a migrant hotel at the centre of the ongoing protests, warning it's unsustainable and risks fueling community tensions. We'll have more on that story shortly. And striking resident doctors, or resi doctors they shall now be known, are on the picket line across England as the Prime Minister warns their 5-day walkout will damage the NHS, with thousands of appointments expected to be cancelled amid the ongoing row over pay. I mean, how do you solve that one? Genuine question. I would love to speak to somebody who supports the striking doctors. This is a lethal position, of course, to take as a doctor, and don't be surprised if people die as a result of their inaction or industrial action, whatever you want to call it. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. It is a Friday. We move into a summer weekend. I'm asking this question: at what point did shoplifting become a minor crime? I think, like everybody, you know, when you're a kid, you have certain memories. As a kid, I've told this story before, when a house down the road got burgled. I may be misremembering this, but I'm sure. I've since been told this probably didn't happen, but through the lens of my memory and thinking back to being about 5, I seem to remember this house having police cornered off tape around it. And kind of people walking in also. I mean, it looked like there'd been a murder there or something in today's language. But it was serious, and the police were there throughout the day. They did fingerprints and stuff like that. And equally, I remember being with my mum in Woolworths. You remember Woolies, of course. And something had kicked off. And this is strange. In my head, I was in a pushchair, so I can't have been, surely, although I've got quite a good memory for those younger years. And I remember there being a bit of a melee, and my mum sort of shuffling me away from where this was going on, and years later had the car. I said, "Oh, I remember that. What was it?" And she said, "Oh, some shoplifter they were detaining." The police had turned up en masse and they were cuffing this guy. In today's language, you'd have to have posted something on social media to get that much of a response. But there it was. So it was very serious crime, is the point. Really serious crime. And I still think it's a serious crime. How did we end up ignoring this serious crime? Nicking things without paying them is not just a crime in itself, but it's symbolic of our societal values and sort of how we've recalibrated our levels of social acceptability. And it feeds into all of that. If we have a growing contingent of people who don't want to pay for stuff, who are willing to scuppers people's livelihoods, cause chaos to businesses, sometimes fear to individuals, then we have a massive problem. If we have relegated theft to something that's not enough to call the police, or call the police and don't get a response, then we have a huge problem. I think most of us should be able to get our head around that. I think this is a really serious crime. It's one of the kind of, is it one of the deadly sins? It's one of the commandments. It's biblical. It's probably in every good book somewhere. Don't nick stuff you ain't paid for. It's quite simple. Nearly 3 thefts a minute are being reported by shops amid this epidemic. We are looking at record numbers. 530,643 offences reported in the year to March. I mean, this is absolutely massive, a 20% increase, and the highest since 2003. So we are looking at astronomical figures for a crime that appears to be largely ignored. So I want to speak to you on a couple of levels here. If you work in retail and you've experienced these chancers who just nip in and help theirself, can you explain the process? I mentioned this earlier in the week when I spoke to one of the girls at the checkout in Tesco, and she was saying to me, I said, well, what? She said, look, I can't remember what it was I bought, and there was a security tag on it, and you naturally have that conversation. Oh, you can't take any risk these days. You've got to put a tag on everything. She said they will nick anything. She said they will nick absolutely anything. And I said, what about the guys on the door? You know, because they have the little security fella, who's usually a bloke that looks like he's in between jobs and doesn't much care very much, and he's on his Todd virtually. What's he going to do if a family of 4 professional thieves go in there, fill up, as she described to me, fill up a basket each, 4 of them, and then leg it to the car park, stick it in their car, and off they go? He can't do anything about that, can he? But that's how bad it is. I mean, it's just commonplace. It's just everywhere at the moment. So if you work in retail, explain your kind of bird's eye view on this and what you've seen and experienced, and what happened if you're a manager of a store in some area. And what do you do? I know a fellow that manages a supermarket, one of the school dads, and it's a big affair. And he said you can't. He said you make a phone. I think he said you make a phone call to the police, and the police say, is the person compliant, or are they kicking off? And if they're not kicking off, you've got almost no chance of the old bill showing up. And he, again, was telling me the story of a woman who filled the shopping trolley and then at the last minute went to the sort of tobacco counter to buy a scratch card, so it looked like she was engaging in a purchase, and then just walked out. They collared her, and in the end, she just walked out. So she sat there in the manager's office for a bit, no police turn up. The manager can't hold her there. What's he meant to do? Pin her down with Waitrose handcuffs? I mean, it doesn't happen. So off she goes. Another one walks the plank, another one legs it and gets away with it. And just by the way, to feed in and compound this issue, we've now got asylum seekers staying in taxpayer-funded hotels, swiping thousands of pounds of designer gear from top stores. This was an incredible story, an expose by the Sun newspaper that were tipped off by a security firm looking at organised gangs. They went to places like Liberty, which is, you know, a bit of a swanky store down there in the West End, just on the back of Oxford Street, behind Oxford Street. And they had the bags, you know, with the foil in them, so they dodged the alarms. I mean, this was organised crime. We don't know who the specific people were, or their country of origin. It looks like 2 white guys, and I only mention that for the obvious reason that they clearly haven't come from Iran or Eritrea, but their faces are blurred for legal reasons. And then back to the asylum hotel. I mean, organised criminality at the biggest kind of level. So how do we solve the problem? How do we crack this Gordian knot of criminality that seems to have been relegated to a sort of minor misdemeanour? I mean, if I went out lifting, is that the criminal phrase? Is that the patois down there in crime land? If I went out on the nick, on the thief, and filled my bags up down Selfridges or something, it's quite possible I would be able to walk out with the stuff. But even if I was collared and arrested, I'd spend, 4 or 5 hours at a police station. Nothing's going to really happen, is it? I mean, I might get off first offence, might get off with a caution. Nothing much is going to happen. The likelihood is I could walk home with about 2 grand's worth of stuff. How did we end up relegating such a serious crime to the sort of lower levels where it doesn't always even command a response from the police? Not because the average cop can't be bothered, nothing to do with them. This is a whole different ballgame in terms of policing this. There's so much of it. And if you've got situations such as this, and by the way, can I just factor in something else? The snatch theft of phones and bags has hit a 20-year high as well, 90,000. Over that same period, 90,000. So we've got people shoplifting to the tune of tens of thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands, 530,643, 90,000 bags and phones are nicked. I mean, what sort of, how is this the 21st century? How is this 2025, for goodness sake? Let's speak to Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, who's with us to help us out on the big stories of the day. Afternoon to you, Henry.
Good afternoon.
Always good to have you with us. And let's start then with this shoplifting epidemic story. Nearly 3 thefts reported every single minute, including asylum seekers who are apparently at it as well, swiping thousands of pounds worth of designer gear from top stores. It means we've been hearing plenty of this on the front line. Let's have a reminder.
Get down! Get on the floor! Yeah? Okay? Mate, you're under arrest, okay, for shoplifting. You don't have to say anything, mate. Harm your face. You don't mention when questions to you later on in court. Mate, come here. Give me your hands.
I'm not resisting. I apologise, bro. I'm sorry.
I apologise, I'm not resisting. He knows the protocol, that one. That's, of course, assuming you do get a police officer out, Henry.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's several reasons for the epidemic in shoplifting, but I think the thing is that once you stop, if you know that the police are going to come, this is the case for quite resource-intensive policing, is that if you know the police are coming, you don't do it, which means the police need to go to fewer of them. But once it's established that the police probably aren't going to come, as you described, the disincentive goes right down. You compound that with the fact that very often some of these shops, they have an explicit policy of their staff not confronting shoplifters.
Yeah.
Because it's not worth it for them to have staff potentially injured in the line of duty and everything else. They don't want to have sufficient security teams. I mean, sometimes you see those videos where the security officer is actually taking on a shoplifter, and my heart goes out to them. They're little heroes, the ones that do that. But my God, they're on their own. And it's bad enough if there's one. But the real problem is the vast majority of this kind of crime is committed by quite a small number of people relative to the population. But we don't send them to prison, right? There's this idea these days, because we haven't built enough prisons and because the prison reform lobby doesn't like sending anyone to prison, that you shouldn't send someone to prison for low-level crime, quote unquote, right? And look, I'm not a complete law and order turnkey. First offence, maybe second offence. Absolutely, try and give somebody a community sentence, a restorative sentence. Sending somebody to prison does have downsides. But if you're in there for your 35th offence, and I think there was research from Civitas a couple of years ago that showed that 35th offence is the offence on which, on average, you will go to prison.
Yeah.
I mean,
that in itself is quite telling, isn't it?
Exactly, right? There's no disincentive. Giving somebody a community sentence for their 5th offence is mad, because they have proven they've been given that chance, they've been given it several times, and they haven't done it. And frankly, if we put the quite small number of people responsible for a vastly disproportionate amount of low-level crime in prison, we wouldn't have it.
And I wonder, when it comes to any government getting serious about this has got progressively worse over the years, of course, and people will say, well, this is about policing. Yeah, it's partly about policing, but it seems to me, Henry, it's probably more than that. That there is now a sort of sense, there's a bit of a green light that this is sort of okay tacitly. Yeah,
exactly. People take signals from the society around them, right? And part of that is the prospect of punishment. But if you have that, part of the thing is if no one else is doing it, right? If the streets are orderly and the shops, everything's open, but nobody is stealing, that does create a social pressure on you not to steal. Whereas if lots of people are getting away with it, it's a bit like fare jumping, right? Robert Jenrick had some eyes rolling in Westminster when he did that thing about confronting fare dodgers. Yeah. But what's really obnoxious about fare dodging is that it's one of the things that the law-abiding citizens see every week that makes you feel like a mug.
Yes, right? For paying for stuff.
Exactly. I happen to know, because I have to do a tax return, exactly how much I pay for TfL every year for the tube and everything else. It's thousands of pounds. And so it's a quietly radicalizing moment when I see yet another person just forcing the gates. Yeah. And it was the same. I not quite where I live now, but where I used to live, the co-op near me was shoplifted, I swear, every third time I was in it. Yeah. And again, you're there with your, it's a cost of living crisis. You're there with your basket of groceries, and you watch the next person just sprint out of the shop with a load of free stuff. And then, as you say, there's stuff in security containers. There's more and more stuff that the staff have to fetch for you and unlock. And it just contributes to that. It's a bit like, the not maintaining the high streets and everything else. It's really low. And you sound like a bit of a blimp for complaining about it. But it all adds up to that really sort of low level but widespread sense that society isn't working.
100%. We're going to continue to take calls on that. How do we even begin to solve the shoplifting epidemic? Lines are open. And this story, Henry, Essex Police Commissioner telling the government to stop sending migrants to found suitable hotels to avoid fueling community tensions. We know that Epping Council unanimously urged the government to close the Bell Hotel, backed up by the Essex Police Commissioner as well. There's clearly a couple of issues on this, but the point that's being made there by the Essex Police Commissioner is that, you know, there are clearly some would argue no hotel is conducive with this, but some very specifically just don't work in certain areas.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a really interesting dynamic, actually, because what we've tended to see, maybe because costs are cheaper, is that the areas that these hotels are bought out and rented by the Home Office don't tend to be the areas where this kind of policy of having a very liberal immigration and asylum regime actually polls very well. And so you've got people, you know, in the nice sort of shires who are voting for a nice compassionate government, and then it's fine. All the migrant hotels are kind of in you know, in places like Epping, not in the comfy shires where they live. And so the reason specifically that the Bell has been shut down is because simply the police resources were too much, right? In order to put enough police there to keep that place safe, it was simply far too resource intensive. Now, that's going to create quite an interesting dynamic, I think, because the danger for the state, like we were just talking about with shoplifting, is once you've established for people that works, that if you can get enough people out for long enough, the government will shut the hotel. That creates an obvious incentive for them to do it. Now, one of the government's, I think, insane alternatives to hotels was to start trying to put these people in private accommodation, you know, go on the rental market and rent stuff, which, I mean, one, distributing them around the community where it's hard to keep them safe or police them, and two, in a housing crisis, taking, you know, housing stock off the market is mad. But what they should do, I think, is just find hotels in those areas. Look at the polls. Look at the polls. Find the areas where, you know, a liberal immigration regime, a liberal asylum regime polls really high, you know, Liberal Democrat seats for starters, and just put them in there. Right? That makes perfect sense. Those people don't seem very likely to kick off. They officially support the policy. Seems sensible to me. That
would seem very sensible, but of course, you know, sensible stuff doesn't seem to have much of a place in the current upside-down world we're living in. Henry, stay with us. Henry Hill is, of course, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. We'll be back with more from Henry in a few moments' time. 0344 499 1000. More to come. We'll talk about the doctor strikes. We'll talk about Jeremy Corbyn's new party. We'll even talk about Hulk Hogan, R.I.P. Details on the way. 1:20. This is Talk.
got a knock on the door and they asked me whether I'd visited Israel, and I said yes. They said at first that they were safeguarding officers. I thought I didn't know what it was about, and I said...
That must be very worrying to hear safeguarding officers. You must, when you hear that, you think immediately you've done something wrong.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And they said it was about Israel, and I said, oh, well, my son didn't go. He stayed with my mum because they thought that I'd taken my son to a war zone.
DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
23 minutes after 1, Betty says the issue of 50% of the UK has been told, the issue is that 50% of the UK has been told it's OK to have a free life and it's all the man's fault. They don't have 120,000 a year cushy jobs, from furlough to reparations, benefits, PIP to free lawyers to make unlimited claims from state and employers. The culture has been ruined by Blair's laws and generation. The UK needs Singapore-style benevolent dictatorship for a few years to sort itself out. You do kind of wonder, don't you? You just need to get a little more robust in this. This belief, and it is the Blairite belief. I mean, you could say, well, Blairite isn't quite what Corbyn would be. We'll come on to him in a moment. But this idea that the state can do much more than it actually can do. And all you've got to do is throw some money into those areas and you'll solve the problems. And you arguably won't fundamentally solve the problems. We've got Henry Hill with us, who's always solving problems for us, which is great, deputy editor at Conservative Home. Let's move to the other big story of the day. Of course, it's doctors' strike. Striking resident doctors are on the picket lines across the country. It's a 5-day pay dispute. This morning, now this was very interesting, Mike Graham grilled one of the BMA resident doctors committee, co-chair Melissa Ryan, on this very issue, who frankly failed to make a convincing argument. Let's have a listen.
Where were you a doctor in 2008?
Why are you asking me that? How is that relevant?
Well, because you say you want the pay restored to 2008 levels, but I don't believe you were a doctor in 2008. Were you?
So 2008 is when austerity came in line, is when our pay started being
eroded. Were you a doctor in 2008? Were you a doctor in 2008?
We've had 17 years of pay erosion. And
were you a doctor in 2008?
To be reversed. It's not relevant about what happens with doctors
You're asking
when they
to
come
have
in.
your
It's a
pay
very
restored
long
to a time when you were a child.
Program.
How about you get your pocket money with 2008? How much was that? I mean, you know, you're just not a credible individual.
It's been eroded over 17 years, and what we want is for our pay erosion to be reversed. That's all we're asking for. We're asking for the government to come and negotiate, and so far all they've given us is empty promises.
I'm not surprised they're not negotiating with you, because you're insane. No, I don't think they should negotiate with you. I think they should fire you, quite frankly.
Strange enough, I was having my hair cut this morning, Henry, and another customer walked in and he said, I've just been listening to Mike Graham, a car crash of an interview with a junior doctor, and I mean, there it was. She wanted her pay restored to a time when she, well, as Mike said, to quote, was a child. I know that doesn't cover the whole issue, but nonetheless, rather interesting. It's a mess, this one, isn't it? And I don't know if West Streeting or anyone else knows their way out of it.
Yeah, I mean, for some, most insensitive of you to mention haircuts, man. Like, you know, some of us.
I do apologize, Henry. Listen, frankly, you look so good the way you look. You look like my neighbour. You look ridiculous with hair.
I mean, that is, in fairness, that is true. On strikes, fundamentally, the thing is, we can talk about the backs and forths of each individual strike as much as we like. This is playing out exactly the same way it did under the Tories, and the basic problem is that three things are simultaneously true. One, the NHS budget is one of the big budgets that's basically eating the British government from the inside out. Yep. You know, even during austerity, as that lady being interviewed mentioned, NHS spending actually rose by 25% in real terms, and I think 40% in cash terms between 2010 and 2024. That's excluding the pandemic peak. Two, the NHS never has enough money. It's basically always running on the absolute limits of whatever it's got. And three, we don't pay internationally competitive wages for doctors. So we spend an awful lot of money training them up, and then many of them go and work overseas, right? Yeah. The fact that all three of those things are true at the same time says something quite fundamental, which is that there is a structural problem here with how we do at least the training of doctors, if not healthcare overall. Other systems seem to manage to provide universal healthcare and higher wages for medical staff. So what do? I mean, there are several things you could do. You could, for example, allow more junior doctors, or resident doctors, as they are now called, to be trained up. But of course, who blocks that? The British Medical Association blocks that. They negotiate with the government.
Why do they block that? I've never got to the bottom of that.
Well, their argument is that it maintains standards. But I mean,
so have fewer doctors.
it's basically supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
Like if you choke the number of doctors being trained up, it puts them in a position where they can try and get more money out of it, right? Whereas you could also allow private hospitals to take trainees. Did you know that you can't do a medical traineeship in one of this country's private hospitals?
Wow.
Another choke on supply for no particular reason. So there's various things you can do. The problem for the government, if you don't do that though, is, you know, the Tories in the last government, they loved facing off to the medical unions, right? They kept calling on that kind of legacy of Thatcher facing down the unions, but they missed something really fundamental, right? Which is that actually for the first 7 years of her premiership, Thatcher didn't face down the unions. Thatcher folded to the miners at least twice, right? The big strikes, if you think back to those big strikes of the 1980s, there's the miners' strike from the government side, and then there was the Murdoch print strike, right? Those were the two big defeats for trade union power in Britain. What made those different to now? In each case, the government and Murdoch had a win, right? They were driving transformational change in an industry, and at the end of it, the union would just have vastly less power, right? Like Murdoch was moving towards having the electronic printing machines. Thatcher was just shutting the mines. And that meant that they had a defined period of time in which they needed to fight the unions, right? Yeah. Thatcher could stockpile South African coal because she only needed to outlast them for about a maximum of a year. Same deal with Murdoch with slightly different circumstances. Here, the big problem for any minister, including Wes Streeting, and I'm including the Tories, this isn't a partisan point,
sure.
The big problem for any minister saying, I'm just going to face down the militant unions, is they can shut down the NHS, man. Like, well, ultimately, what are you going to do? They've got the leverage.
But that, ultimately, I suppose, would be the only way you... I mean, it would be drab, but, you know, we remember, that, you know, how volatile and tricky the print workers' strikes were. And anyone that's read about that era, it's absolutely fascinating in terms of, you know, industrial relations and the government and union power, or the overreach of union power and all of that. I mean, that was an industry that absolutely needed to change. You know, if you'd gone with some of those head honchos back then, we'd still be, and I'm really not saying this because I'm in this very building right now, but, you know, back then in the day when everything moved to WAP, you know, these guys would still be, you know, ordering bottles of ink to put newspapers together.
Yeah. And, you know, I can actually tell you the one thing, structural thing that could fix this, right, is Thatcher's, we don't need new strike legislation, really. Thatcher's strike legislation in the private sector has worked very well, right? Trade unions still exist. I'm a member of two of them. I'm not anti-union. They help workers in disputes with employers, but you don't get these big political strikes anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Why do you get them in the public sector? Because the Thatcher law is that you can only strike in a direct wage dispute with your employer. But in the public sector, like the NHS, your employer is the state. And so the entire sector is implied. Right, so what you could do is make NHS trusts grant maintained and then make them legally the employers of doctors and nurses, right? That means that you could only have a strike in one trust because they would be a pay dispute with the management of that trust, which would manage its own money. It'd still be the NHS, it'd still be public for you and me to go to, but it would mean that you wouldn't have these huge debilitating strikes and you wouldn't have national pay bargaining. Now, obviously, that would be hugely controversial. You'd need a plan for facing down some quite vicious medical strikes. But if you beat them, and you'd only need, you know, to beat them for so long until this was in place, then you wouldn't have this problem anymore. But until the government decides to grasp the nettle and deliver structural change, then frankly, we are going to be at the mercy of the medical unions for the same reason that a generation, 2 generations ago, we were at the mercy of the dock workers.
Yeah. It is that simple. Let's move to a final story. Then we didn't get around to doing Jeremy Corbyn, but I think we should just pay a very brief tribute, if you wouldn't mind, to Hulk Hogan, who's sadly been kicked out of the ring, as it were, at the age of 71. I thought it was a bit early, really, for a man who's been an athlete all his life, in a manner of speaking, but he died after a cardiac arrest in his Florida home. You could say changed the face of wrestling, I think, reasonably, Henry.
Yeah, I mean, they are athletes, actually. I mean, it's obviously it's slightly campy and funny, and there's the idea that because wrestling is narrative and fake, that they're not actually fit. No, all the physical stuff they do is entirely real. Yeah. It's absolutely extraordinary. You remember, I don't know if you ever followed wrestling, but I watched it in the Attitude Era, I think it was called, which was a bit after Hulk Hogan, that he set the stage for it. But, you know, you have things like...
Yeah, you like The Undertaker and people like that.
Kane, the original Kane reveal. But, you know, Hulkies. But absolutely defined his industry, right? I mean, if you're looking for a definition of professional success, Hogan defined his industry.
100%. And, of course, crossed into the silver screen as well and, you know, made himself a good few quid along the way, I think we can say. He'll be missed. Henry, you'll be missed as well, but only for this weekend, because we'll speak again next week. Of course, Henry Hill, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. Thank you to him. Over to you. 03444991000. How do we solve the shoplifting epidemic? We've also got illegal migrants sneaking out of the hotels they're stuffed in that you're paying for, going on the shoplifting sprees as well. I mean, who'd have thought those two stories would ever manifest as one? Ben Habib will join us. We've got the journalist Andrew Tettenborn, and also one owner of a store that knows what it's like to be on the receiving end of a bunch of half-wits coming in and lifting and helping themselves to your goods. All of that on the way. Keep it here. It's Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, just 25 to 2 now. So the UK facing a surge in shoplifting. Nearly 3 thefts reported every single minute, the highest in over 20 years. I don't know, I have no idea why this is sort of relegated to a minor crime. You might not even get a cop come out. They're unable to attend due to manpower issues. Annual losses now top 1.8 billion quid, with retailers spending £700 million on extra security. So I'd imagine the Amazon camera people are doing rather well out of it. In London's West End, obviously it's a big hub for where people go thieving. Up to 70% of cases are reportedly linked to asylum seekers in taxpayer-funded hotels. It's an extraordinary revelation. Some allegedly stealing to repay those who smuggled them into the country in the first place. We're going to speak to Ben Habib shortly. Also, Andrew Tettenborn, the writer and academic, is with us too. But first, let's speak with Paige Mengers, owner of luxury resale store Phoenix Style. Afternoon to you, Paige. I mean, we spoke a little while ago, of course, not long after you'd been spectacularly robbed. I mean, and you even had all sorts of security in place.
Yes, we were. We were robbed earlier this year. Both of my stores were attacked by the same 2 men, and nothing happened. The police didn't turn up. They just gave me a reference number, and so I took to social media and then got a resolution. And both of them have been caught. Yeah, but it has caused so much hassle for our business, you know, and the cost is enormous. Yeah,
because you obviously, because there is that kind of very, very annoying response that comes through is, well, you're insured, so what's the problem?
But the insurance don't pay. Yeah, they don't pay for shoplifting because it's
too common.
Someone coming into your store, it's deemed as, and stealing something from you is deemed as shoplifting, and insurers won't pay for that.
So you are thousands and thousands out of pocket as a result of goods that were taken from your stores. You then presumably, I mean, you already had some pretty good levels of security. I suppose you then have to take another look at that and sort of up that. I would also say there's perhaps even a bigger price here, Paige, and that is just existing as a businesswoman, as a retailer, thinking that, you know, any moment now, some undesirable character can walk into my shop and just steal what I've worked really hard to do. And that comes with it not just a level of infuriation, but I would imagine a sense of fear, really.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I lost a member of staff because of it, a really good member of staff, which is, you know, really disappointing. But also, you know, we're a female-run business, and a lot of my members of staff are now scared.
Yeah.
They really are. So we now have to lock the door. We have extra security on the door. We're changing the doors so that you have to buzz in and out. It's, you know,
I mean, that's not how being a retailer was meant to be, was it? You should have your door wide open, almost, particularly at, you know, nice days like today. You know, everybody's welcome to come in and have a look at our goods. That's how it's meant to work.
And it is. It's off-putting for customers because they don't like it. They don't like the fact that the store is closed. They want to be able to come in and browse at ease. You know, now they have to literally ring a bell, so there has to be intent. Well, that's what they feel. But we're only doing it because we're just we're protecting ourselves, we're protecting them, and we're protecting our stock.
And I would imagine there's not a day goes past when you don't wonder about this subject, when you wake up or when you're coming into work thinking, has it happened again? Will it happen again?
Every single day.
Yeah.
You know, and when I get a call from their security company, my heart just sinks. Of
course it does.
Or the alarm company, and it's like, oh no, your alarm has lost power or whatever. You know, you just, it's awful.
It's exhausting and it's emotionally draining, I would imagine. Any progress on what happened to the two? I mean, if it's still an ongoing case, obviously we can't talk about it, but were they dealt with?
No, they've been caught, and one of them had a sentence of 6 months, and the other one has 18 months of community service.
Right.
So
did they have were you aware of previous convictions when the verdicts were read? Did they tell you what else they've been up to, this pair?
Oh, yes, they'd wreaked havoc. There was loads of thefts. So I wasn't alone. There were many others.
But if you get 6 months, you're out, one would assume, in about 4. So
this is true.
Yeah, and the other one got a suspended sentence. Goodness me. Paige, I wish you loads of luck. I know it's a very successful business you run and you've worked darn hard to make it that way. Thank you for being on with us again. We'll speak again, I'm sure, but hopefully under happier circumstances. Paige Menges, owner of the store Phoenix Style, robbed not once but twice by the same people. Full CCTV, as crystal clear photos as you can imagine of the characters that did it, but still couldn't get the police out at the time until she took to social media to try and expose the crime. Andrew Tettenborn is a writer and academic, joins us now. Andrew, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
How did we end up relegating what I consider to be an extremely serious crime to this sort of lower, minor level status?
Well, I must admit, what is very worrying to me is quite simply the way in which it's carried out in a brazen way by people who know that nothing's going to happen. Because actually, the best way of stopping crimes like this isn't necessarily lock them up and throw away the key or cut off parts of them with a rusty knife. It's make it absolutely clear that you are going to get caught and something at least is going to happen to you. Now, the real difficulty with a great deal of shoplifting is that people now know quite simply that nothing will happen. I know people who work in retail, and they say they know who it is coming into the shop, they know their name, they know their address, they've got them on CCTV, they phone the police, and the police say, sorry, Gov, we've got better things to do, nothing we can do to intervene. And the more that happens, the more this shoplifting is going to happen. The only answer in the end is to make sure that these people are apprehended, that these people are caught, and something will happen to them.
And if you did have I mean, people will always argue, you know, whether prison is effective. We spoke to a leading defence barrister this week who, you know, thinks for cases such as this, prison actually compounds the problem and ultimately creates a bigger criminal at the end of it. I'm not sure he's absolutely correct about that, but that was his contention nonetheless. But if you had, I don't know, a mandatory right, you're caught shoplifting, you go to jail for 5 years, would that be a deterrent, do you think?
It might be, but it all depends actually on whether the police are going to do anything about it. Yeah. And ironically, if you start putting massive penalties like that on it, well, one, everyone will go for trial by jury and the jury won't convict. And two, that there will actually be a certain amount of sympathy for them. What I think matters is whether they're likely to be caught. Obviously, the other side of the story in The Sun was where these people had come from, but that's a slightly different matter. But certainly we're looking for an effective penalty.
Yep.
An effective curfew might be an idea, i.e. an ankle bracelet they can't take off and confined to their home from 6 o'clock in the evening till 8 o'clock in the morning.
I find, Andrew, I find it incredible that the electronic tag, I know previously there'd been some sort of practical working problems with it, but, you know, it's the 21st century now. You can buy a tag from all sorts of places. They can make it work now. Why is that not, you know, the go-to initial punishment? You're tagged and curfewed.
I strongly suspect it's inertia by the powers that be.
True.
You know, you've got someone who's fairly young, bright, comes in and says to their line manager, I've got this brilliant idea. They'll say, oh, well, it's not in accordance with policy number Z19. You know, I've spoken to my line manager and we have other priorities according to our last meeting. It's the way organisations work, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I sense you're right. Listen, Andrew, great to have you on with us, sir. Thank you as ever. Andrew Tettenborn, the much respected writer and academic. The tags and the curfews, is that not like number one on the list of dealing with this? Although when you look at the level of crime and the amount of surging shoplifting, bag theft, phone theft, I mean, we're in the hundreds of thousands. Shoplifting, nearly 3 thefts reported every single minute. And now we're hearing stories of asylum seekers in taxpayer-funded hotels allegedly stealing to repay those who smuggled them into the country in the first place. Ben Habib is leader of Advance UK, who's with us now. Ben, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
We often talk about migration. We often talk about shoplifting. I didn't really suspect we'd be talking about them in the same sentence. Yet here we are, as if what's happening with the hotels around the country isn't bad enough. We've now got people leaving the hotels, shoplifting, so they can pay the people that got them here in the first place.
Well, we've got a complete collapse in British civil society. And of course, you know, one of the most optical bits of evidence for it is the absence of borders, our lack of preparedness to actually stop people breaking into our country. So we shouldn't be surprised when they then break into our shops and nick our stuff. You know, if we're prepared to allow effectively illegal migration, it's only a hop and a skip before we allow people to steal stuff. But the figures out today are really quite shocking. What they reveal is that shoplifting is at a 20-year high. I think it's at the highest level it's been since the way that they collect data nowadays was first brought into place in 2003, up 20% from last year. And I think it is a function of a complete breakdown in our criminal justice system, but also a preparedness by those in authority to actually effectively legalize what they call petty crime, in part by calling it petty crime, but also in part by releasing from prison and making it quite clear to those who would be criminals that even if you do more serious crime for which you've been repeatedly committed to prison, grievous bodily harm, for example, we will let you out. And what could be any greater encouragement to would-be criminals than knowing that actually in the first place they won't be prosecuted. If they are prosecuted, they'll go to prison for a shorter period of time than they first thought because they'll be let out. The whole country is imploding under this absence of political will to police, first of all, our borders, and then police law and order within the country itself.
And it seems that this, looking at this Sun exclusive, Ben, where they've got some intel and been able to kind of follow this up, I mean, this looks to me like organised crime. This doesn't seem like just two characters who turned up at an asylum hotel and thought, oh, how do we make a few quid? I know, we'll go and nick some stuff. This looks to be a much bigger affair. Yeah,
and you know, it's bound to become bigger and bigger. And at the moment, we're focusing on petty crime, but it's going to go from there, Ian, isn't it? You know, the minute they feel comfortable getting away with what they're doing, they'll expand their horizons. It's human nature. You'll push the boundaries of your envelope to the maximum extent. And we need a thorough pushback. And, you know, without wishing to repeat myself, because I have said this on the programme before, at the heart of this problem, bizarrely, believe it or not, is the Human Rights Act, an act which basically prevents us from being able to police our borders. And I don't want to over-dwell on it, but it is of critical importance that people take on board that if we aren't prepared to prevent criminals breaking into our country, challenging them when they're here is going to be doubly difficult. But also the Human Rights Act has turned victimhood on its head. Victims are no longer afforded the protection of the law. It's the criminals who go through the criminal justice system who need to be protected under the Human Rights Act. The theory is that they might be abused by the system, by the state. But they're the ones who are the abusers. And we've got to reacquaint ourselves with the difference between right and wrong. We've had everything turned on its head.
And it's never going to happen under this government, Ben, is it? I mean, it's not in the DNA. These people don't even believe it. They'd probably be looking at some of these shoplifters as victims.
100%. That's what I mean. The criminals are looked at as victims. This government is more obsessed at the moment trying to determine whether or not it should recognise Palestine as a separate state than it is on governing its own country. You know, we make a song and dance and we talk about the need to protect Ukraine's sovereignty, but we're not protecting our own. We say the same about Palestine. And just on the Palestinian issue, you know, Hamas is a terrorist organization. If Starmer does recognize Palestine as an independent state, he's effectively endorsing Hamas.
Completely.
Is that really what our blooming politicians should be doing at the moment?
And it's not even that hard to understand that. I mean, Emmanuel Macron, we expect no more from that little pipsqueak, but that's the way he rolls. But you're right. Are we going to get to that stage when we recognise a terrorist-run organisation as an official, legitimate head of state that will join the United Nations next, for goodness sake? That wouldn't surprise me. Ben, listen, great to have you on as ever. Ben Habib is the leader of Advance UK. Thank you to him. Over to you on the former issue of shoplifting. How do we solve it? What's the issue? Your experiences of it. Have you been a victim, a witness to it, as you're a copper? If you're a serving police officer, I'd be really interested to hear from you. Maybe you can only message us 87222. We'll respect your anonymity, of course, as well. 10 to 2, this is Talk.
There is absolutely no excuse on this earth for why we are where we are 1 year into more than a year into a new government. This administration had plenty of time to prepare proper solutions to stop the boats. What's happened, in fact, as everybody knows, is that there's been a multiplier. Instead of stopping the boats, even more than ever are coming over. And for the government now to say, oh gosh, you know, things are looking a little bit hairy.
Got a knock on the door and they asked me whether I'd visited Israel, and I said yes. They said at first that they were safeguarding officers. I thought I didn't know what it was about, and I said...
That must be very worrying to hear safeguarding officers. When you hear that, you think immediately you've done something wrong.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And they said it was about Israel, and I said, oh, well, my son didn't go. He stayed with my mum because they thought that I'd taken my son to a war zone.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one in from Rubes in Hertfordshire says, I was in Boots in Epping. Epping's getting a lot of coverage at the moment. I was in Boots in Epping the other day, holding a basket full of shopping when a man walked in and said to the shop assistant, right, which perfume have you got for me today? She replied, there's nothing left. You've stolen it all. All the tester stands that usually hold full-size bottles were completely empty. I asked if she was joking and she said no. The man then found something else to steal and casually walked out with both security guards just watching him go. I couldn't help but ask, why do I need to pay for my items? Isn't there a point when you see these characters brazenly, walking with filling up the baskets? Can you not just like blow a massive whistle if you're and shout, there's a thief, and everybody kind of crowds round? Would that not kind of have a similar effect? Although I guess most shoplifters do it fairly surreptitiously. Maybe that is the problem. Nick is in Chester. What have you got for us, Nick? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's Chichester, actually.
Oh, Chichester. Apologies.
That's all right. I spent a lot of time in Cape Town before COVID.
Yep.
And I called my friends the other day and said, planning on going back again, and asked, is it safe? And they said, oh, we don't think about it anymore, simply because they find it safe.
Wow.
And what they have out there is a zero tolerance on people who are caught, but the police don't do the catching. What they have is security guards with guns, but obviously that's because it's South Africa. And they're always present. They're always driving around the street, always visible. And if any shopkeeper or business owner or household owner has a problem, they're immediately called. They're the first responders. They can bash them about a bit, handcuff them, and they take them to the police station. And the police, their job now is to process them. And as our modern-day police, all they want to do is sit at their computers and process things without going out on the beat, this would be perfect, because we as a community could pay in our town rate for security to be around all the time and drop them off at the police station.
Isn't the problem, not the problem, but the example you gave, that they clearly have a far stricter, no-nonsense approach to it, but they have a bigger problem with it?
Oh, well, they don't have a bigger problem with it because people know that they're going to get caught. And very often it's the ones who are off their heads on spice or whatever drugs there is that causes the real problems. That gets the police out. There's a real symbiosis in Cape Town and the Western Cape whereby, there is extreme levels of poverty and extreme levels of wealth. But they need to work together. They know that and they respect that, and everybody gets along quite nicely.
Is that a connected factor? Because, as somebody who grew up in a very kind of obvious working class family, we certainly didn't have disposable income, and the last thing my mum or dad would have thought I was going shoplifting, for Christmas presents or food or whatever. So I've never really bought into the fact, we have to understand some people have nothing. Having said that, the world we live in today, where the kind of the riches of those that have most are fully on display through social media, magazines, the digital world, etc., more than any other time, and the expense of the Western world, knowing that, you know, owning a house is, or even a car, is out of reach for most people. Should we therefore, what I'm trying to get to here, Nick, is should we ever have sympathy with somebody who steals because they're poor?
Not at all. Absolutely not. If you're coming to a society which protects the people that live there, protects the property, there should be absolutely zero sympathy.
Yeah.
And the other day I was in the village near to Chichester where I live, and there was some chap, certainly wasn't British, going up and down the road on a scooter, and he was scouting out for simple pickings. And it's not the rich people he's going to be looking for, because they're all going to be, they'll have gates, they'll have security.
Of course, yeah, it's that sort of middling area where you think there might be a few quid there, but it's still easy to get to. Listen, Nick, I've got to move. You're a great caller. Thank you for that, Nick in Chichester. It's a good point, but people do, as Henry Hill said, take their signals from the society around them, and if it becomes like, oh, shoplifting, nicking, that's quite easy and nothing much happens to you, so maybe I'll give it a go. Couple of £100 here, couple of £100 there. If I can do the food shopping on an on a weekly basis, that's the equivalent of earning 10 or 15,000 a year. Fantastic work if you can get it, and nothing happens to me. 0344 499 1000. We'll be back with you in a few moments. Right now, the news at 2 o'clock on.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Yeah, welcome back to the home of common sense. What are we talking about here? Asylum seekers staying in taxpayer-funded hotels, swiping thousands of pounds worth of designer gear from top stores. Big exclusive in The Sun today. Some amazing journalism on this one, really getting into the heart of another angle on two stories, both shoplifting and the asylum rip-off, contributing to a shoplifting epidemic, of course, that has seen thefts rise to 3 a minute, according to retailers. This is a very grim reality of modern times. Folk don't like paying for stuff. They'll just nick it. What's the answer, and how do we solve it? Lines are open. Also this afternoon, striking resident doctors are on a picket lines across England as the Prime Minister warns their 5-day walkout will damage the NHS, with thousands of appointments expected to be cancelled amid the ongoing row over pay. Of course, more details on that shortly. And more than 6,000 farms, a record number, have already been forced to shut down for good this year after Rachel Reeves's tax changes made it too tough for many rural businesses to stay afloat. What an absolute shame, a criminal shame this is on our government. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Loads to get through here. Nigel says, great show. The problem with our society is that it's lawless. In its day, this country ran because the population allowed the rule of law and largely complied. Now British society is crumbling. Law doesn't work, except for Brits who still feel compelled by the old ways. It's going to take a miracle to undo. Yeah, maybe it is. Let's get a word on the big stories of the day. Paul Embry, writer, trade unionist, author of Despised, Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Classes. Paul, good afternoon to you, sir.
Hi, Ian. Good to be with you.
Nice to have you with us again. We haven't spoken for some time. Can I just check, you're still a firefighter, or have you legged it?
No, I haven't quite legged it yet. I've still got a couple of years left in me. I'm still out there doing the job just about.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, nothing will remove a man from his ladder, as they say. Good to have you with us, Paul. I mean, let's start, by the way, because you know a thing or two about, trade unions. That's well and truly your area of expertise, and we've got a trade union, sort of, in the doctors' strike, who are clearly now taking it to a level where I sense public support is somewhat waning on this one. Now, everybody wants people to be paid a fair whack for a fair day's pay, and we understand it if you've been restrained for many years, that you'd like to try and kind of restore it to what it should be. But what's your overarching take on striking doctors, Paul?
Well, I mean, I've been on strike as a firefighter, Ian, and it's an agonising decision when you work in an emergency service or an essential service to feel that you have to withdraw your labour to make a point. And it's not something that I ever did lightly. It's not something that any firefighter I ever worked with did lightly. I'm pretty sure it's not something that the resident doctors are doing lightly. But when you consider, I think they have a fairly strong argument. When you consider that they've lost something in the region of 20% of their pay in real terms over the last 17 years. At the same time, their workloads have increased. At the same time, NHS waiting lists have increased quite dramatically. Yeah. So they're being asked to do what is a really important and critical job for, in real terms, much less pay. Now, I don't think they're going to get that pay restored. I think they probably know they're not going to get that pay restored in full. But I think it's a bargaining tactic. And what they're saying is, look, what's been put on the table is not good enough. We want something more. We deserve something more. And I think they probably do, actually.
I did kind of wonder. I mean, the BMA seemed very entrenched in their position on this. And I know Wes Streeting has looked at other ways of dealing with it. I was reading the comparisons between, similar types of countries like Australia, for example, where doctors are paid more than they are over here, but their pension is not quite as generous. And I know that's an area that often comes up in a negotiation. I'm sure you've found it in your world as well. Let's have a look at the pension rather than the wage. I mean, that seems fairly reasonable.
Well, I think, look, I mean, all these things are a negotiation. We've been involved in disputes in the fire service where the government has come for the pension. And what people often don't understand is although we were always criticising the fire service and other public sector workers were for having what people call generous pensions, but of course you have to pay into those pensions in order to get. I mean, I for example, as a firefighter, pay something like 13% of my salary into my pension scheme, which is far more than most people pay. So you're only kind of getting what you pay for. But look, I think the BMA are open for negotiation. I think if a reasonable deal was put on the table, I think they'd probably recommend it to our members, to their members. You don't get something like 90%, I think it was, of doctors voted yes in the ballot for this action. You don't get that in an emergency service unless the people feel genuinely that they've got a legitimate grievance. And I think in this case, as I say, I think they do.
We will watch with interest. There's 5 days of this to come, and of course the knock-on effect and the devastation. I know that's sort of part of industrial action that you make a point, but you know, it's in a very delicate and sensitive area. West Streeting doesn't seem to be moving at the moment, but we'll have full updates as we know more. Let's go to this story, Paul. The asylum seekers spotted shoplifting designer gear, and part of me wants to sort of, I don't want to laugh at this, but I know, you know, we often talk about asylum seekers and what's happening with channel crossings, and you know, it's clearly out of control. The government have lost control. The last government lost control. Nobody, you know, is really calling this out or doing anything serious about it. We often talk about that. We often talk about shoplifting as well. And here's a story where both of them come together. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Well, the whole thing is a complete shambles. Let's be blunt about it. And I think when it comes to what is very clearly the broken immigration and asylum system, you can kind of feel the tension in the air at the moment around the country. Now, I know some people have kind of used the word tinderbox or powder keg. I don't necessarily think we're at that stage. I hope we're not at that stage. But I sense, Ian, that it would take maybe 1 or 2 high-profile incidents, God forbid a terror attack or something like that, where we genuinely could be at that stage. And I just think there's a lot of kind of underlying resentment in many of our communities, many of our unheard of communities. People who feel they've been abandoned and disregarded by the political establishment in this country for so many years, and they're kind of finding their voice now. And I think you can sense a bit of a storm brewing. These are communities that are worried about economic insecurity, they're worried about the levels of immigration, integration problems, lawlessness on the streets and so on. And stories like this, the one that you're referring to, is almost like the perfect storm, because it highlights the broken immigration and asylum system and the lawlessness. And for as long as these kind of things keep happening, I think that resentment is going to get stronger and stronger and may break out in some way that none of us are going to like.
Yeah, and I'm fascinated by the sort of class thing on this, or the political element which feeds into class on this, where it's kind of often sort of written off, certainly by a lot of sneering politicians I sense in this particular government, as a kind of right wing, you know, all a bunch of mad right wingers if you've got a problem with, you know, this, that and the other. Well, I mean, you could just come at it, as we discussed yesterday, from an economic perspective and, you know, forget what you think of the colour of someone's skin, where they came from, whatever their disposition might be. You could just say, well, hang on, it's costing us £7-8 million a day. We're taxpayers. Sorry, that can't go on. You don't have to be a nutty right-winger or some extremist or a radicalised kind of half-wit to have a problem with it. And years ago, when I was a kid, growing up in a similar background to you, Paul, I think this would have been a concern that was very much a left-wing concern.
Well, indeed, and as you know, Ian, I've been an activist in the Labour movement for around 30 years, and you know, there was a time when regulation of the labour supply was a core left-wing principle. People on the left, trade union leaders, Labour members of Parliament, knew that you had to control the labour supply so as to allow governments to plan around things like employment levels and welfare, and to make sure there wasn't undue pressure on wages in certain sectors, to make sure there was enough housing and so on. That was an entirely sensible and mainstream view. And actually, the other view of open borders was very much a fringe position on the left, you know, 20, 30 years ago, where it was largely the preserve of Trotskyists and anarchists and hyper-liberals. Now that's turned around completely. And actually, the open borders, the sort of hyper-liberal immigration position has become the mainstream position. And saying, actually, we should have regulation of the labour supply, people like I say that, you're almost regarded as museum pieces in the labour movement. And all the things that we're seeing, these tensions, not just in terms of the economic factors, but the social and cultural tensions where you have large numbers of people suddenly arriving in working class communities. I saw it in the place where I grew up in Dagenham, the real tensions that can cause, tensions not born of racism or xenophobia, but simply because people's sense of order had been violated. And you see that now crossing into towns like Epping and Diss in Norfolk. And I still think, Ian, that large parts of the political establishment still don't get it. You can see that in some of the pronouncements that we see when they give interviews.
Yeah, and even when, you know, I watch Yvette Cooper sort of, you know, attempt to sound tough, and you know what it's like when you see politicians, you think it's not, you know, you can say the words, you can try and sort of add some depth and gravitas to your delivery at the dispatch box, but if it's not in their DNA, you just know that they don't really feel it. They don't feel it, that's for sure, and therefore probably don't really mean it.
Well, I mean, I've got this theory that the vast majority of politicians, sooner or later, of whatever political party, they in the end, they all seek the metropolitan embrace. They all seek kudos from their peers. They want to be welcome at dinner parties in North London with other members of Parliament and influential people and people who run our cultural and creative institutions, our academic, educational institutions, and so on. And that's why you see people who may start off with a particular line, who may argue the traditional line on immigration or family, you know, all of the touchstone small c conservative issues. But eventually a lot of them will feel the pull of the progressive and managerial class and will, you know, fall into the trap of you know, going across essentially to that class because they feel that they want to be part of it, because of course that is the dominant class when it comes to the upper echelons of our society. And that's why I think, you make the point yourself, when politicians say these things, they don't really mean it. And that's why I think if there is to be any change, it's got to come from below. It will come through protests on the streets, which I hope are peaceful. And certainly should be peaceful, but nonetheless, it's only through those protests, a bit like Brexit, when people, ordinary people, do something that the politicians really don't want them to do and really goes against their whole worldview, it's only then that they're forced to act. And I think it's going to be something similar when it comes to these issues.
And it's interesting, you can kind of see it with Starmer. There was a lot of it with Blair. Blair was, it was always said Blair was, you know, at his happiest when he was sitting at a dinner party with Bill Gates, not when he was sitting with David Blunkett or somebody. And similarly with Starmer, you know, you get the sort of Justin Trudeau characters of this world, the Macrons. They seem to love that international backslapping powwows that they get together for. That really suits them. I see our own Prime Minister looking most comfortable in that environment than I do in his own domestic one, which kind of feeds into what you were just saying.
I think with any Labour leader, I think you need the ability to be able to go into a working men's club in somewhere like Stoke-on-Trent and not look and sound completely out of place.
100%.
Now, with Blair, and you're right, he did like the other type of company, but I think he probably could do that. And I think that there are other Labour leaders, Neil Kinnock, for example, John Smith, who also could do it. I think then when you look at someone like Ed Miliband, who couldn't do it, Jeremy Corbyn couldn't do it, I don't think Keir Starmer can do it. Now, I think Keir Starmer has got people behind him saying, look, you've really got to concentrate on some of these themes around family and community and patriotism and tackling law and order and immigration and so on. But I don't think Starmer is there instinctively. I don't think that's his politics. And I think that most people in red wall constituencies, for example, also think that. They also think the Labour leadership is not doing this instinctively. And that's why they're throwing their lot in, you know, with Reform UK, a party that I don't personally support, but you can see why they're sweeping up so many votes.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because this bit really fascinates me, where you've got Keir Starmer. I don't know if you've ever heard the news on the street, by the way, Paul. He was the son of a toolmaker, apparently. Who knew? Big revelation. I just dug that little fact out this morning. So he grew up, you know, he ended up as a middle-class upbringing, but he did initially, there was a moment, a little window, when they were a sort of working-class family. Nigel Farage very much the antitheses of that. He grew up private educated, worked in the financial market, did very well in that. So one's a posh boy, one's a working class boy, and yet you could stick Nigel Farage in a housing estate to have a cigarette and a pint of beer, but you couldn't put Keir Starmer in there. So is it therefore just down sometimes to personality and not reality?
I think also it's certainly partly that, but I think in Starmer's defence, it's also because Farage hasn't yet been properly tested.
True.
And it could be that if Farage, and I don't rule it out, if Farage becomes the Prime Minister after the next election, and still we don't get growth in the economy, and still we don't get immigration numbers down and NHS waiting lists down and deal with the housing crisis, then I think actually his star will probably will shine a bit less than it is at the moment.
Yep.
So Farage has never been tested in that way, but certainly he's able to connect because he speaks the language, at least, of many of these people.
100%.
Look, we've got woke institutions. I'm not going to allow that if reform comes to government. I'm not going to allow a situation where you've got massive immigration levels that are affecting your community, where, we're not able to stop the boats and so on, and where there's a whole kind of worldview at the top of society that contradicts yours and millions of other people, ordinary working class people like you. He gives that message and it resonates, and I think that's why he's picking up so many votes.
Just a final one here, Paul, right into your industry on this one. The hero firefighter facing disciplinary action for using the term fireman, sparking debates about sexism and woke madness. I mean, I am surprised, I'm not surprised. What do you make of this? I mean, I know it's a firefighter these days, but to some degree, interchangeable, isn't it?
Well, I just think we need to be sensible about this. I mean, you're right, it is firefighter, and it's been firefighter for many years now. I mean, we've had women in the fire service, quite rightly. I've worked with many women firefighters. They've been excellent, most of them, since the early 1980s. So you can see why a woman would be a bit upset if exclusively the term fireman was used. So technically it's firefighter, just as it's police officer and not policeman anymore. But the point is that occasionally people slip, and they don't do it out of malice. They don't do it because they want to cause offence. They do it in this case because that's a term that's been used for over 100 years. And I just think a sensible word in the ear, look, we don't use that term anymore because it's firefighter. That's all it takes. For someone to find themselves on a discipline charge because of it, I think is complete overreach. So he has my sympathy.
And we must remember that Lincolnshire a few years ago axed Fireman Sam as a mascot because apparently Fireman Sam was seen too much as a kind of gender stereotype. I would have thought Fireman Sam probably accelerated recruitment for the fire service. Or was it London's burning? One of the two.
Probably both, actually. But again, just an example of overreach. The idea that this kid's cartoon character, who's been around almost since I was a kid, I think, and everybody can associate with, the idea that you should ban it inside a fire service simply because you think it's going to cause offence, I think is kind of an indictment of how we've become, such an offence-taking society. Not ordinary people. I don't think most people do take offence at stuff like that, but it's almost done vicariously by people in positions of leadership who think they have to protect the ears of people further down the chain, and it's nonsense and it's insult.
And frankly, Lincolnshire need to get with the script, Paul, because Fireman Sam has been experiencing some transitional issues. Now Fireman Pam, apparently. So I think we should all encourage Pam into the new world. Maybe back as a mascot, who knows. Paul, great to have you with us and lovely to see you again. Thank you. Paul Embry. He is, of course, writer, trade unionist, author of Despise Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Class, and he's still, on top of all of that, a fully employed firefighter as well. Thank you to him. Or is he a fireman? 0344 499 1000, 2:20 back with you, coming next on Talk.
10K cash for Coldplay.
Play 10K cash for Coldplay with 10 grand in your hand tax-free plus 6 super hot tickets to witness Coldplay's sold-out Music of the Spheres tour from a VIP box at Wembley Stadium on August 22nd.
Tickets, top tunes and 10 grand cash.
Don't panic. Enter to play 10K for Coldplay at talksport.com/win and get ready for the feel-good gig of the summer. 10K for Coldplay is a joint TalkSport Limited competition run on TalkSport, Talk and Virgin Radio. See talksport.com for terms and conditions.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. Comments coming in from you. John says, Paul is wrong to say a terror attack may light the fire. One more rape of a white young teenage girl is more likely. I think that's absolutely true. Dan in Kent, the junior doctors are using inflation charts that is not recognised as a reliable source of real-time inflation, just like their demands. It's inflated. Get back to work, junior doctors, and stop this selfishness. I don't blame junior doctors for asking. I don't blame anyone for asking and giving it a good go and going right up to the wire on negotiations. I think you have to have a reality check, and I do think if you work in the public sector, in any area, whether you're in the, I know that the police have a pretty rotten time, almost marked out in some respects compared to other areas of public service in terms of their pay and conditions. Huge question marks over how the girls and boys in blue are treated in this respect. But I do think whatever area of the public sector you work, there's a kind of slight trade-off that you might not always get a fully inflation-linked pay rise every single year. If you like, your package of payments will work in a slightly different way. For example, you will have pretty much job security for life, and there is almost nowhere in the private sector where you could ever guarantee that. So unless you committed second-degree murder or set fire to the kitchen in the office, then you are pretty much guaranteed a job for life. Now that in itself is worth. I can't imagine what that level of security feels like. I mean, that must be something else to think that, when you go on holiday, you get. I mean, I work in a sort of self-employed world, so I'm all right with it. I do other things in addition to this, and that's a nice position to be in, and I run my own affairs in that respect. So that's great. I choose to do that, and I'm fine with that. But I can see how for many people that wouldn't be so savoury. So if you do work in a field, especially in medicine, where there's nearly always a shortage, you're always going to have a job. You're always going to have a job, and then you've got a cracking pension, and that's not. It's not the kind of... I imagine junior doctors go, stop mentioning the pensions. It is a good pension, and it is relevant to this. So many people in the private sector have no pension at all. They couldn't afford a pension. There's loads of people who are in their sort of 40s and 50s, early 60s, heading towards retirement, don't have any... only have the state pension come in their way. They never really paid into one. It didn't happen. It wasn't possible. Couldn't afford it, etc. And I know that's changed now a little more in the workplace over the years, where there is a compulsory sort of pension element. But that was never there for many people in their older years now. So I just think you have to take a little bit of that. It's not irrelevant that people in the public sector might have sort of some differentials in terms of how it works for them. We are going to be back on the phone soon. Our phone lines have apparently slightly scuppered. There is, as I always seem to say, a man with a big old spanner been sent up a pylon to fix the problem. However, we've got loads of comment coming in from you. Andy in Cornwall says, this may be a rant, but however, My daughter has been a doctor in the NHS for a few years, and I watch her come home having been in charge of 200 plus seriously ill patients, vile and abusive families, spitting, swearing, physical abusing her. And then she has the pager for heart attacks across 10 plus wards. For a basic wage without overtime of 38,000, she comes home broken, crying, pretty damaged. Why she cares for all of her patients. So when the less informed people mouth off at resident doctors wanting a pay rise, they really need to see it from the other side. I don't agree with the strike, but I do agree with higher wages for doctors. Average wage, including overtime, is 45,000, with little chance of progression, whilst they are responsible for people's lives, and as well as being for a salary not reflective for their responsibilities. The BMA should increase the number of speciality training for already qualified doctors that would give progression, reduce overall waiting lists, and ultimately decrease the wage bill with more specialists. Also, don't forget doctors of years ago sold the new doctors down the river with pension changes, work pattern changes, progression suppression, whilst drawing up the ladder behind them. A lot of people are not fully informed. So yes, the pay rise, yes to more training, and no to the strike. And yes, she is working over the strikes. As she says, the patients are why I am here. These are doctors you will lose. People who say let them go should really consider if we need them as well before gobbing off. Now, I do get that. Like every story, the story on the inside is very different from the one on the outside, all right? So I understand it, and thank you, Andy, for that. I guess and nobody should experience what your daughter experiences, Andy. I mean, it's horrendous. The mere idea that you attack an emergency, or particularly a doctor who's only there to help you, and families kicking off, you know, the vile contingent of, you know, some areas of our gene pool that don't quite, you know, they don't quite get what decorum and good manners are. So that's horrendous. Nobody should put up with that. Similarly with paramedics, police officers, firefighters, anyone in those public-facing jobs where usually they are there to help somebody. Some might say, well, you know, your wage does increase eventually, and depending on your position, hospital doctor, GP, etc., when you start to practice into, you know, going into consultancy, etc. So there are greater options. I understand that as well. But I do think, to me, the take-home point that Andy makes there was all about what had happened with previous generations. The BMA should increase the number of speciality training for already qualified doctors. Apparently you can't do that in the private sector, but you know, maybe that should be open to that. They should just increase the amount of doctors that can train. Generally, that I think would also be a start too. Thank you, Andy, for that. No phone lines working at the moment. We can do voice notes, however. Back to that issue of shoplifting. Here's Steve.
I bet the only high street shop that's still open that doesn't really get any shoplifting is probably Argos, isn't it? Because you can't just walk in and take something off the shelf there. It's like all pre-booked, or you have to buy it from the catalogue and then go and get it given to you. You pay for it and then you get it. I mean, that's probably the only way forward for most shops, but I don't know how the likes of your food supermarkets and all that do it, but that's probably the only foolproof way of having a shop on the high street now, isn't it?
Yeah, good point, actually, yeah, because all you wait for, you just wait for something to appear on one of those shelves behind the counter. It's your lawnmower or whatever it is you bought. Steve mentioned the golden word there, catalogue. Remember the catalogue? We used to have the catalogue lady, Dot. We used to call her Auntie Dot for some reason. She used to come round it seemed like every few weeks, it was probably every few months, because they bring out a spring, summer, autumn, winter one or something like that. And me and my sister would look there, particularly when it got to the Christmas one. Oh my God, you go to the back of that catalogue and start looking up all the Christmas stuff, the toys. It was just an Aladdin's cave of absolute sheer delight. How bloody innocent was that back then, looking through a paper magazine. I bet you could buy an old K's catalogue on eBay somewhere. Thank you to Steve for that. On that same issue, this one's from Kelvin.
Stopping the migrants and that from, you know, shoplifting, it can't be that hard. Put, you know, big steel doors up, you know, around the shop fronts and that. And then just have one door where you go in one at a time. You have a couple of big burly blokes on the doors, and give them the rights to do whatever's necessary to keep them out, and just let people in one at a time. You just keep a couple of blokes on the doors and stop them going in. The other way they're doing it is just shut all the shops down and stop paying all the taxes and everything else, the rates and everything, to the government until the government decide they're going to do something.
Yeah. We're in a perilous, terrible, horrible, dirty old mess. Right across society, it seems at the moment. It will get better, I'm confident. Someone will make it better. Thank you to Kelvin for that. 0344 499 1000. We are working our best to try and get the phone lines working so we can get you on air. We can do voice notes, so it's the same number if you want to put a message across. 0344 499 1000. You can message 87222. We're going to talk about farmers. Record number of farms closing down in the wake of things like inheritance tax and goodness knows what else is going on. Mo Metcalf-Fisher is the External Affairs Director at the Countryside Alliance, a big voice on this discussion, with us next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots to get through. More comment from you on the way as well. 0344 499 1000. Now, more than 6,000 farms and rural businesses have closed in the past year, the highest number since 2017. Most of these closures occurred in the first 6 months after the Chancellor Rachel Reeves cut inheritance tax relief for family farms. Just 3,190 new businesses starting in this sector, which is shrinking at its fastest pace on record. Let's speak with Mo Metcalf-Fisher, External Affairs Director at the Countryside Alliance. Afternoon to you, Mo.
Afternoon, Ian. Always good to see you.
And you too. I mean, the idea that this sector is shrinking, just that sentence is haunting and deeply disturbing.
Totally, because it's not just about the future of the countryside and our network of family farms, but it's also about our economy and our wider food security, things that the government need to be taken incredibly seriously. I'm actually in Warwickshire at the moment. I'm at the Game Fair, which is an annual celebration of the rural way of life. And it brings together people from all across the countryside to celebrate not just farming, but also shooting, hunting and fishing. And I've been speaking to businesses all morning who very much connect with that story in the Telegraph today. They feel that not a lot of people want to make investments. The uncertainty and the anxiety around it means that it's so much more than just farms that are feeling the pinch. It is all those businesses around it. These figures are terrifying.
Yeah, they really are. What do you, I mean, I mentioned a couple of issues around this. What do you put this mostly down to, Mel? I mean, it's always been a I mean, particularly farming, and as you said, there's lots of other industries in the countryside, but particularly farming, it's always been a tough industry, and often it's survived because of its family base, where the legacy has passed it down, and that's been, you know, a very big strength of farming. Communities have survived because of that familial link. Are there other reasons than just Rachel Reeves and her, I don't know, grabbing hand of doom, or is there something going on in this world?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it would be wrong to say that every single decision has been based exclusively on Rachel Reeves and that disastrous budget and that policy.
Yeah.
You know, as you just said, farming is a deeply complex industry. The scale of the problems that face that community are very vast. But the inheritance tax, the family farm tax, for many is just like the final nail. They just feel that they can't plan. It was that bit too much for them. And we're getting closer and closer to the implementation date. And still, Rachel Reeves is refusing to even meet with farming representatives. It doesn't appear that they have any real regard whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, it was only this week that we've learned that the Treasury have been actually awarding or rewarding the masterminds behind the family farm tax, like it's something to celebrate. And it's absolutely bizarre.
Yeah.
And so my message, Ian, and take it from me, listening to all these rural people, many of whom have rural Labour MPs, is they need to work really hard between now and the autumn to get the Chancellor to a change track as soon as possible.
Yeah, and it's a fair point to finish on. Mo, thank you for your time. Good luck with the rest of the fair that you're up to there. Mo Metcalfe-Fisher, External Affairs Director at the Countryside Alliance. Such a crucial backbone style. I mean, there's a whole range of backbone industries in this country. Don't anyone tell me that farming isn't one of them. Food security, all that goes with it, the family legacy, the hard work, just the delight at being able to go to a supermarket and buy something that was picked, grown or bred on a British farm. I mean, that is always, when Geoffrey Palmer was telling us to slam in the lamb, which I think was for New Zealand lamb, wasn't it? I was always thinking at the time, as long as it's a British one. British farming is massive, it's huge. It should be encouraged and it needs to grow. And people need to start joining the countryside in terms of other thoughts, other areas of profession. More comment from you. Becky says, great show, and though I certainly do not and never have voted to the left, what a sensible, honest and common sense contributor Paul was. In fact, though I am sure he never would consider it, I think he would sit well within the reform fold in many respects. He was refreshing to listen to. I noticed the football team he supports. Yeah. Did he mention the football team he supports? I would anchor a guess at West Ham, but I could be ultimately wrong. We'll try and get some detail on that. Just before I read the rest of your message, Becky, Paul Emery stands out. We've been speaking to Paul on and off for years, and but we hadn't spoken to him for a variety of reasons for the last maybe 6, 7, 8 months. But he's marked out, really, because, yes, he is a trade unionist, and, yes, he has been a Labour man all his life. But he doesn't sing from some kind of weird Marxist indoctrinated hymn sheet. He doesn't have these kind of go-to, I'm lefty, so I must think this about migration. I'm a left-winger, so I must think this about capitalism. He's not a nut job. He's very sensible. And if you didn't know his politics, other than when you get into something like industrial action, where I kind of knew Paul would have more of a sympathy with doctors than perhaps many other guests we might have. But other than that, you would never think this was a Labour man. And that's because he doesn't decide to dress himself up in daft left-wing clothes and just trump certain stupid lines because it suits the party position. And he never has done. And he's clearly not enamoured by Keir Starmer either. Anyway, Becky says, you spoke about migrant hotels. The home of that team is not a large town, and yet has 2 migrant hotels in it. I may be wrong, but that I think was because they were offered more funding into the town coffers to take this level of migration, population, and still the Labour Council cannot balance its budget. My boyfriend will not visit the town himself because even during the day, it is now a very sinister feel. If I were able, I wouldn't go near it. It has just been announced that Marks & Spencer's, the only real destination shop remaining in the town, is closing. I still don't know what town this is, by the way, unless she's going to tell me at the end. Yet it was once thriving destination town, and in my youth somewhere we always visited for its wonderful shopping and thriving nightlife. Now it's a sinister town where many of the residents will not even think of visiting. It is a disgrace. I can't leave this country because of my health, but I wish I could. But I hope my stepchildren and godchildren will do, and go and find a wonderful life elsewhere where they are respected, where they feel they fit, and where they can enjoy their life instead of feeling like they are not welcome in their own home, and where they can make their mark and enjoy success. The thought of them staying here, living through this, horrifies me. That's a brilliant message from Becky, apart from the fact we don't know what town. There's a lot of references to the town. Unless Paul mentioned the town, she said, she was listening to Paul, I think he would sit well in reform. How refreshing it was to listen to him. I noticed the football team he supports. Was that written behind him somewhere on his, maybe it was written on the wall or something. So I'm none the wiser, Becky, as to which town, but I'm sure we will be able to, somehow piece it together. But it's a great message you send, Becky, and I absolutely share that sort of sense of, it's not just frustration. Frustration sort of oversells it. It's sadness, right? It's a real sense of entrenched sadness. What's happened to the place? Everything's upside down. You don't recognise the town you're in because it's closed down or because it's just completely lost its sense of legality and decency. Shoplifting is rife, the few shops that are open. That's a very real position. Let's go to Jason in Sheffield. We've got the phones back. Jason, how are you doing? On doctors, what have you got for us? Hi.
Oh, Jesus. It's
Ian.
I mean, I was listening to that doctor this morning on Mike's programme.
Yes.
How they're so hard done by with their pay. What I did then is I thought, right, they say they're in stress and they're overworked, okay?
Yeah.
Right, so I went on and had a look to see what the salary was for the Special Forces, the SAS and SBS.
Okay.
And it's roughly, on average, half of what a doctor's salary is. Just over 30,000 to mid 45,000, depending on your rank and how long you've served. Now, those people have to go out of the country and leave their families for 6 months of the year, a lot of the time.
Yeah.
They put their own lives at risk, trying to save other people, the same as the doctors do, and they can't go on strike. Yeah. So they can't go on. They can't even say that they're in those organisations. They can't even tell their wife or their husband or the kids. They can't tell anybody. It's a bit like MI5 and MI6. Yeah. They can't tell them. They actually work for it. So if doctors think they're under stress because you have to work 12 hours a day, try sitting in a muddy field for 48 hours non-stop pointing a gun at someone who's trying to kill you. Now that's stress.
It's a very, very good point, and it's it's a completely reasonable comparison. Jason, I've got to move just because of time, but thank you. And nothing wrong with making, if we're going to debate industrial relations and pensions and jobs and public sector workers and positions and pay structures and grades, etc., then, yeah, that's absolutely a brilliant inclusion into that discussion. Because if it is about stress and toil and all that goes with it, then I think a job where you lay your life on the line, quite literally, and are prepared to fight to the death for your country, I don't think you can have this discussion without at least entering that as Exhibit 1, right? This from Katie, who says, on shoplifting, I understand what you say about being poor not being an excuse. However, many, many years ago, when my daughter's father and I were both working and I was studying, we had a young baby, we could not make ends meet. Our friends who didn't work and were on benefits had Sky TV, 2 cars, rather lovely council houses, and at the pub every weekend, and they were laughing at us for working. During those times, we poached fish, pheasants and rabbits. Only enough for us to eat so we could survive. We would have rabbit stew for dinner and I would make us rabbit sandwiches for lunch. And if we were lucky, a bit of trout or pheasant. I love this text. I cooked all the veg that were in season. We weren't criminals. We were trying to survive because there was nothing left for food after paying the rent and buying nappies. I went on to be very successful, to be very successful, and the other people who didn't need to poach still live in their council houses living off my tax. Is poaching the same as shoplifting? Says Katie. It's a great, I mean, if you nick a rabbit, I mean, unless you go around some kid's house and steal it out their hutch, I mean, that's nicking a pet rabbit. If you nick, poaching a rabbit, you can't poach a rabbit, can you? I think that's legitimate fare, Katie. I think you're allowed to hunt, right? And if it's on somebody else's land, then the issue would be trespass. Because I don't think the farmer would go, yeah, that rabbit there, it's definitely mine. It's always on my land. Yeah, but in a minute it'll hop off with its little friends. It'll be on somebody else's land. Yeah. You don't own the rabbit, Farmer Giles. No, I don't think that was theft. I don't even think it was poaching. The pheasant, that's the same thing, isn't it? These are wild beasts. I don't know about deer. Do you need a special licence to shoot one of those things? I'm sure you probably do. There it is. Katie, thank you very much. It's a very inspiring story. We lived off the land to make ends meet. Didn't last forever. It was a difficult time. It was challenging. Rabbit stew and rabbit sandwiches and a bit of old pheasant if you were lucky. Thank you to Katie. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
A knock on the door and they asked me whether I'd visited Israel, and I said yes. They said at first that they were safeguarding officers. I thought I didn't know what it was about, and I said...
That must be very worrying to hear safeguarding officers. When you hear that, you think immediately you've done something wrong.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And they said it was about Israel, and I said, oh, well, my son didn't go. He stayed with my mum because they thought that I'd taken my son to a war zone.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Just gone 10 to 3. Don't go away, Lenny, with you in just a sec. We've got the voice of doom, of course. It's the mystery voice with a political angle. You're looking essentially for the name of an MP. Mystery voice. Here's the voice. Have a listen.
I certainly have things to say.
I mean, that is so hard. I honestly think it's the hardest one we've ever done. And remember, we've done German chancellors on this feature. Have another listen.
I certainly have things to say.
And another listen.
I certainly have things to say.
It's not Ian Duncan Smith, Jacob Rees-Mogg or any of that lot. A bit older than that. 87222. So don't phone because we're not giving away any prizes and it clogs up the phone lines, but you can message 87222. If we get a right answer, we'll tell you on the other side of the news. If we don't, it rolls over to Monday. Here it is again.
I certainly have things to say.
So I had this conversation earlier with a mate of mine at the station. He said, what's that mystery voice that you did the other day? It was the one where you asked about political decisions were taken. That was what the voice said. And I couldn't remember who it was. Can we remember who it was, Amy? We're looking in the data. We're looking in the... Isn't it funny? There's like 10 of us sitting here. No one can remember it. Political decision. Was it a while ago? It was a couple of weeks back. Political decisions were taken. That's what the voice said. I know I'm confusing the feature here. I'll get the answer in a couple of moments, I promise, if it kills me. Lenny is in Ashford. Lenny, what have you got for us? Hi.
Well, good afternoon, Ian.
Afternoon, Lenny.
Well, what it is, it's what's wrong with our country. There's no accountability anywhere you look. And
that seems that way.
I mean, yeah, well, if you look at Law and Order, right? Now, that... Who had a lot to do with that was Theresa May when she devastated the police force.
Yep.
And what did she get? Instead of accountability, they stick her in the House of Lords.
That's what tends to happen, isn't it? You've got an automatic journey to the House of Lords as a former Prime Minister, which is rather extraordinary. Not all of them took it. Tony Blair didn't take it. Gordon Brown didn't take it. And David Cameron was only made a Lord because of him becoming the Foreign Secretary.
Yeah, but what it is, it should be looked at first. Do they deserve it? You know, I mean, you look at Javid. He laid the foundations for all the boat problems we got, and they stick him in the House of Lords. They knight him.
Yeah. I forgot about Sajid Javid, little Sajid. Where's he gone? He's still in the. He's in the House of Lords, isn't he? Lording it up at £365 a day.
Well, they knighted him, but what it is, and when you've got idiots like that, you know, in charge, getting rewarded, well, you know, what's going to happen with our country?
Yeah, that's true. Have I just elevated him to the House of Lords, or is he just a knight?
Well, he's a knight anyway, but if he's a knight, I don't know whether you're a knight, you can sit in the House of Lords.
No, you have to be a lord. You can be a knight. It's a nice thing to get if you don't. If you like the moniker Sir, I think it's a lovely little accolade. However, you don't get into the House of Lords unless you're invited.
All right, but well, how can you knight a failure? You're supposed to be there if
I 100% agree with you. It's all over the place, isn't it? The whole idea of how many people get given a. You've got. What's his name? Sadiq Khan. He got one.
What's he done to? I mean, he's devastated London. I mean,
but even if he hadn't devastated London, the fact is, why do you get a knighthood for doing your job? I mean, that to me, a knighthood would be something where you have demonstrably and unarguably gone way beyond the parameters and the remit of your job. You've gone more than the extra mile, so therefore you get the knighthood. So you're the mayor of London, haven't you done brilliantly, but you also managed to oversee the time when the whole place flooded or something like that. You know, Giuliani became a big man in America, mayor of New York, because of course after 9/11. I would kind of vaguely understand your reaction to that or something big. You might get a knighthood, but just overseeing like multiple stabbings and ULEZ cameras, I don't know how that gives you a knighthood.
Well, if you look at it, I mean, London has never been so lawlessness. You know, there's never been, you know, I mean, I'm an old Cockney, right? I was a Cockney barra boy, and I'm frightened to go back and look at my roots because of the crime now.
Yeah.
Now
that's sad, isn't it?
Yes, you know, and what it is, I mean, everywhere you look, I mean, you know, of course people are going to go in and empty a shop if there's no accountability.
Yeah.
And you know, and Starmer's not doing nothing about it. You know, I mean, you tell me how Starmer has improved anything in this country.
Well,
Give me
there it
one
is.
thing he's
That's a great question. Lenny, I'm going to move on that brilliant, profound question. How has Keir Starmer improved this country? What could you point to? I'm not suggesting it's an easy job. I'm not suggesting he didn't inherit some jip, because he clearly did. That would have been the same for anybody, by the way. But how would you say, in over a year in office, he's improved this country? Jeff, don't go away. I'm going to be with you as soon as we possibly can. Lots to come in the next section, including our Crime Con feature as well. We've got a fabulous criminologist coming on with us too. We'll talk about the doctors' strike. Matthew Hulbert will join us on that, and Steve Bryan, the former Tory health minister, as well. Big guest list, big comments from you. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to leave us a voice note on as well. And will we finally, I say finally, it's only day 3 or 4 of the Voice of Doom. This is the voice you need to identify.
I certainly have things to say.
Did we find out who the other one was, Amy? Oh, it was Stephen Byers. Stephen Byers, the former Transport Secretary. Stephen Byers, the Blairite Byers. We're back after the news at 3 o'clock on Talk, which is next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Lots to wade through. We'll continue with our main subject that's threading itself throughout the course of the programme. Asylum seekers staying in taxpayer-funded hotels, swiping thousands of pounds worth of designer gear from top stores, which contributes, of course, to an already existing problem, the shoplifting epidemic. It's seen nearly 3 thefts per minute reported by retailers. Who knows how many more that go unreported. We'll continue to take your calls on that, asking the question, the very obvious question, but nonetheless it should be asked. How do we solve the shoplifting epidemic? Also this afternoon, and big on the agenda, striking resident doctors are on picket lines across the country as the Prime Minister warns their 5-day walkout will damage the NHS, with thousands of appointments expected to be cancelled amid the ongoing row over pay. Is there any way of solving this? Have they got a point? Have they got no point whatsoever? More on that too. And in this week's Crime Talk Crime feature, we will speak to one of the UK's leading criminologists who spent time inside high-security prisons, met some of the country's most dangerous offenders, and isn't afraid to speak out on controversial issues facing the justice system today. We talk to him later in this hour. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news, every bit of great comment, the home of common sense, 0344 499 1000. Linda says doctors and other jobs paid for out of the public purse and getting gold-plated pensions should be excluded from the state pension when they reach the age they can. If they say they pay their national insurance, then tell them that is what it's used for, to pay for the gold-plated pension. They shouldn't get both. That's unfair to all taxpayers in the private sector. Yeah, I kind of get that as well. And on that issue of lawlessness, Nigel says, afternoon, Ian, the problem with our society is lawlessness. In its day, this country ran because the population allowed the rule of law and largely followed the rule of law and largely complied. Now British society is crumbling. Law doesn't work, except for Brits who still feel compelled by the old ways. It's going to take a miracle to undo. I think I read that one out earlier. Nigel's one. I think that happens probably once a day. I always reread at least one message that didn't get deleted after it was read. And I'm always happy to do that, by the way. You know, audiences shift and new people come on board, etc. And it's such a great point. Thank you very much indeed for that, Nigel. Let's move to this subject then of the doctors. Oh, before we do, Voice of Doom. Yes, Voice of Doom. Have we got an answer to the mystery voice? This is the voice.
I certainly have things to say.
These are some of the guesses. Nigel Lawson? Oh, come on. Nigel Lawson's a sort of barrel of a voice. No. Michael Gove, no. Jacob Zuma, no. Malcolm Rifkin, Cecil Parkinson, Norman St John Stevens. It is not Ian Duncan Smith. Norris McWhirter, the record breaker. Douglas Murray, no. John Redwood, no. Can we hear the voice again, Amy?
I certainly have things to say.
Nobody has got it right. It rolls over. Day 4 on Monday. Day 4 on Monday. Stand by. Now, resident doctors in England have begun their 5-day strike, which the Conservatives have called a betrayal of the NHS. The BMA, that's the British Medical Association, is demanding a 26% pay rise, despite the government offering 5.4% and warning that the walkout will cause real damage. Previous strikes have already led to 1.5 million cancelled or delayed NHS appointments. In a moment, we'll be speaking with Steve Bryan, the former Conservative Health Minister. First, Matthew Hulbert, patient leader of Just Treatment. Matthew, good afternoon to you. Let's pick up on that Conservative line, a betrayal of the NHS. I doubt whether you're going to concur with that, but what is your thoughts?
Hi, Ian. Really good to be with you again.
You too.
Good afternoon to you and your viewers. Thank you. I absolutely disagree with that, and frankly, I think it's pretty offensive. I'm from a group of patients that is absolutely backing the striking resident doctors, and I'll tell you for why, Ian. Because what they're wanting, all they're wanting, is pay restoration. I don't think that £22 an hour for people who, you know, life and death situations every day in their hands is actually too much to ask for. And I'd go one step further than that, Ian, if you'll allow me, which is that actually I think it's pretty disgraceful of Wes Streeting and this Labour government to be actively, it seems today, trying to divide patients and those who treat them. I think that's blooming awful.
Is it a kind? I mean, I get all of that, but is there sort of a specious nature to that argument? In that, you know, you could always. There's lots of professions. You know, a paramedic, a police officer, a firefighter. All of these professions. You say, I don't think it's too much to ask to pay somebody 30 quid an hour to shin up a ladder and pull people out of a burning building. I mean, we'd all notionally agree with that. The reality test is somewhat different, Matthew, isn't it? It's, you know, can the public finances afford this? Is it in line with the same level of fairness that is applied to other public sector workers? That's the benchmark, isn't it? Not whether we emotionally feel that a doctor might be worth a few more quid than they're currently getting paid.
I think we shouldn't just notionally support this. I think we should practically support it. And
but I outlined there the problems that, you know, if we haven't got any money to do so and it's out of kilter with other public professions, then we have to regrettably stick it on hold for a bit and come back to it when we can afford it.
I think that's an easy line that governments always use. And what I'd say too is that I think we could afford it. And one way that we could afford it is by putting in something which I believe Rachel Reeves has outlawed today, said she won't do. And I know you may not like this, Ian, but I'm going to say it anyway, and that is by introducing a wealth tax, by asking those who've been successful, and good on them, we're not against success, I'm certainly not, to pay a wee bit more to help fund better public services. How about that?
I mean, it's a bit much. I mean, they already pay most of the tax, and they put more in and take less out. So is that not a dangerous journey to go on, Matthew, in that, you know, 5 years down the line or 5 months down the line, you know, the police or the fire service go, hang on, what about us? They go, OK, not a problem. Oi, rich boy, come here, open your wallet and give us some more money.
I don't think it's dangerous at all. And a phrase that I always use, and I'll use it on your show, I believe a wealth tax isn't left-wing. I believe it's what is morally right. And I believe that an increasing number of people support that. And, you know, I always quote the patriotic millionaires who are very active on social media who say
we've had them on
more.
We had them on the programme.
They're great.
But they don't, I mean, isn't the problem with it that if somebody voluntarily wants to say, I'm worth a few quid, so I'm going to throw a bit more money into the Treasury, you can do that already voluntarily. Right. If you live in a country where, you know, a progressive 21st century country, where your government is saying, you know, the price of a bit more success is that your government will take it from you, that becomes, to many, I know you're slightly more on the left, Matthew, because of your own politics, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not illegal, of course. Maybe it should be, but it's not illegal at the moment. But the point is that it becomes, to many, an uncomfortable precedent where you would always just revisit people with a few more quid every time the country had a problem.
Look, I agree with Wes Streeting on one thing. When he came in and said that the NHS is broken, and you know, many of your viewers and listeners will have heard me talk about what happened to my dear mum in 2022 when she waited 11 hours for an ambulance and then died 2 days later.
Story.
So, yeah, thank you. So I know as much as anyone that the NHS, as it has been being handled or being run, isn't working. But what we argue at Just Treatment, and we argue it unapologetically, Ian, is that is after 14 years where it was being pretty stealthily destroyed. Sure. And we'd argue that it needs to be properly funded and properly public, because again, we argue that, you know, it's all right saying, as Wes Streeting does, that, oh, well, it's all right, the private sector. We say that every time the private sector is used, that destroys the NHS a little bit more as a genuine public service. So we want Wes Streeting to properly, never mind giving certain rhetorical interviews to certain newspapers, get back around the table and let's see if a deal can be struck with the resident doctors.
All right, Matthew, always good to talk and great to have you on. Thank you. That's his honest assessment of where we're at. Matthew Holbert, patient leader at Just Treatment. Steve Bryan, former Conservative Health Minister, is with us as well. Good afternoon to you, Steve. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine there's quite a lot you would fundamentally disagree with in terms of the assessment you just heard from our last speaker.
Well, he speaks for himself, and your listeners can make up their mind. What I would say is that I was at Department of Health with Jeremy Hunt in the first junior doctors' strike, and then obviously I was an MP in the last Parliament during a load of the second series of them. And ultimately, when Wes Streeting said last year, having caved in and given them a 22% pay rise, the biggest in the public sector, I don't know if people at Talk get a 22% pay rise this year, but let me know if they do. He said that this was a journey, not an event. They clearly thought, the resident doctors that is, that there was plenty more to come, maybe not unreasonably so.
Sure.
Equally, over this last weekend, government have been spinning that there's talk around exam fees and cancelling tuition fees, wiping them out, all that sort of thing. The BMA clearly feel that there was never actually a genuine concrete offer on the table around that stuff. And what I learned from junior doctors' disputes in the past is that you can talk about that stuff. You can talk about the other stuff, the rotas, the parking, the meals, all that stuff, but ultimately the BMA just say, yeah, but what about the pay? And they've been very clear, to be fair to them, which I'm not always, that this is a pay dispute. And so I think Wes Streeting's got three problems. One is very personal for him. He's very much hoisted by his own petard, very Trumpian-like in opposition. I watched him in the House of Commons many times say, if you only get in the room with these people, just get in the room for 24 hours, I can solve this. Yeah. Well, turns out it wasn't that straightforward. Who knew? And then the political problem is that they've got backbenchers who are just, the indignity of a union striking with a Labour government because they thought them being there was enough to just stop them doing that. And then the practical is huge because they've just released a 10-year plan for the NHS. The transformation plans that they've got in there, let alone meeting the 18-week standard, this completely upends that. I was talking to a provider of a trust just this lunchtime, and I said, have you spent the last week and probably the next week planning transformation of services for the future, or have you just been dealing with the preparation for and the fallout of this strike? I'll let you and your listeners guess what the answer is. Yeah. It's a disaster. And, and it's not reasonable. It's a 29% pay rise over 3 years. Yeah, sure. There may need to be pay restoration. And if we can get to that place, then sure. But I agree with you, Ian. Read the room. The NHS spends £1 billion a month, £1 billion a month, £12 billion a year on its pension scheme. Yeah. Some doctors will get 75% of salary in a pension every year. Yeah. That is in some ways where the reward is. It's not all about pay up front. If money really, really, really matters to you, then that's not the profession. Nor is it in politics, nor is it in the media.
Steve, just tell me, why is that a bit of a boat? When you mentioned the pension thing, and I've raised this a lot today, let's have a look at the pension. Yeah. And maybe we can recalibrate perhaps how that is paid and the levels that they are set. That's almost, doctors seem to, or certainly BMA officials, roll their eyes when you mention.
Why doesn't that cut the ice, you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, I don't, because it's an inconvenient truth.
True.
But it is also a truth, and I guess that my theory, for what it's worth, and I don't speak for the Conservatives. I'm not a frontline politician anymore. I don't know what they mean by betrayal of the NHS. You'd have to get them on and ask. Maybe you have. But my view is that the Doctors' Vote organisation that has taken over half of the BMA, they were always looking for this. They didn't want to be seen as we pick a fight with the Tories, and then as soon as there's a Labour government, we roll over. Yeah. So I think there was always going to be a dispute here. That's not really the answer. The answer is how did the government handle it? And they've taken what is a very robust, very aggressive line, because their reckoning is that when it comes to cancelled procedures, cancelled operations, at the next election, the public will say, well, of course, poor old government, it's the BMA we blame. Yep. Well, history doesn't suggest that's the case. Maybe history is wrong, and maybe it will be different in the future. I don't know. Wes Streeting is a good communicator. If he can pull that one off, all power to him. But he's going to have to solve this. There's no more money from Treasury. Therefore, if he's going to solve it with an even greater pay offer, it's going to have to come from the NHS budget. And that means something else that you can't do. And I guess the doctors won't like that either.
No, it's a good point. Steve, lovely to have you on. Let's speak again. Steve Bryan, former Conservative Health Minister. Look, no one fully knows the answer. The answer, brutally, is quite literally, sorry, guys, there's not enough money there. I don't understand why it would be such a... I mean, is it really that upsetting to say to doctors, look, OK, we'll do the money thing, but we will... It won't be the 20-odd%. We obviously won't do that because it's crazy, but we'll do some money thing. But we are going to have to re-engineer your pension scheme because it's great that you could negotiate this. Back in the day, post the welfare state, 1948 onwards, when teachers and firefighters and all sorts of people in those public sector roles were given these kind of gold-plated, you have the civil servants that were retiring on, I can't be the only person that's heard these stories, apocryphal as they may well be, of matey who was a sort of Mandarin over there in the Foreign Office or something, not the most senior, but middling, doing okay, retires at 50, gets 250,000 lump sum, and then an index-linked pension for the rest of his life. And you look at that and go, what? So it's really? I know some people at the BBC. You don't think of the BBC as civil servants, but, public sector in that sense. Similarly, and these weren't people who were leaving or starting their job in 1948, but that old pension thing, amazing if you got it. And for those that did, it's happy days, because you've got probably 30, 40 grand a year wage after tax coming in for the rest of your life, plus your little lump sum when you first step down. It's all of these things. There's got to be a point when you go to junior doctors. I don't think we can necessarily keep that going. I'm not sure that's even doable. And as Linda said in a previous text, if you have a gold-plated pension, should we then look at your state pension and say, well, maybe we can, perhaps look at that? Do you get it at all, or do you get a percentage of it? I would have thought if it's about the urgency of the moment, junior doctors need this money now because they're skint and they can't survive, they need it, then you could do something about that, but you'd have to look at it at the other end. Surely that's reasonable, isn't it? I don't know. I'm no industrial debater, or I'm trying to think of the sort of ACAS kind of word, resolver, if that is the right way to look at industrial relations. But you take my point. But it would just seem, objectively, as an outsider on this, that would seem a logical position. But for some reason, it doesn't seem, even as far as I can read, doesn't seem to be on the table. 0344 499 1000. We'll come back to more of your calls in just a couple of moments. This is Talk.
got a knock on the door and they asked me whether I'd visited Israel, and I said yes. They said at first that they were safeguarding officers. I thought I didn't know what it was about, and I said...
That must be very worrying to hear safeguarding officers. When you hear that, you think immediately you've done something wrong.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And they said it was about Israel, and I said, oh, well, my son didn't go. He stayed with my mum because they thought that I'd taken my son to a war zone.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. This one comes in from No Name Given. It says that the doctors highlighting that they save lives and therefore deserve pay is a disgraceful argument with everything they get with the pay and the benefits. Maybe they should look around at wider society. I volunteer my time for free at the local lifeboat, rescuing for no salary and on 24/7 call. I've been training and ongoing training for the past 7 years, not just the 5 that they take to become a doctor. That's a very noble and completely reasonable point as well. It was mentioned earlier from a caller, what if you join the army and go out and lay in a ditch for 24 hours in the depths of Afghanistan on a training course, or on a genuine recce where you're going out there for all sorts of manoeuvres? Does that not count as life on the line? I mean, genuinely? And those that volunteer for lifeboat personnel absolutely up there in terms of people who are happy to take that extra step. I'm not doing that, and you know, there's part of me that thinks I wish I did do something. Maybe I will at some point. I'm absolutely full of brimming with admiration, and it all sounds a bit patronising, but genuinely, people who step up to the plate in a voluntary sector, it's brilliant. And you're right, doctors, incredible job. Thank goodness for good doctors. But you know, not every doctors aren't doing it for free. Not every doctor is Florence Nightingale, and you get paid for it, and you're not exclusive in terms of, you know, the difficulties and the challenges. It's one of a whole group of professions that I would look at and say these are the professions that I look at and go, thank goodness for these people. But it's not exclusive to doctors. There's loads on the list, all right? Firefighters are on the list as well. Nurses are also on the same list too, and they ain't getting a 29% pay rise. Let's talk to Vicky in Bristol. Back on that issue of migration. Vicky, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon there. Hiya. I would just like to say that pretty much these illegal immigrants that are coming over, when they are put in this accommodation, why are they not on lockdown, please? Why are they allowed to run amok and cause havoc in our country?
Well, even if you're not causing havoc, the fact is that you can go wherever you want, right? I mean, that's, to some people, when you're unidentified, you've got no passport or documentation. That's a bit weird, isn't it?
Well, I just think that's absolutely unacceptable. Being a mum of 3, all my children have a 7-year age gap, so it's very difficult for me. And my eldest daughter, who is 22, has special needs. She has the mentality of a 10-year-old.
Got it.
She would literally go up to somebody like that, and honestly,
she would want to be their friend, right?
She would want to be their friend, and I am just so incensed about this issue when you've got mothers protesting and now we're being called far right.
Yeah, for having the audacity to be concerned of a group of unidentified men from mostly third world countries wandering the streets of your neck of the woods.
Ian.
I mean, it's not hard to understand, Vicky, is it? It's really easy to understand, but for some reason, Keir Starmer and others want to suggest that you're a right-wing nut job, Vicky.
Absolutely.
And you should keep your filthy mouth closed of these terrible words.
He can say exactly what he wants, but as soon as
he can do one, Vic. He can do one.
He can absolutely do one. I am so literally mad with him. I mean, I'm not political. I really am not political. But when it comes to community and what we're striving for, literally, I live in a very beautiful sort of little place, and it's all green and lovely. They've just built a load of houses. And I am really, really convinced that they are going to be going to the wrong type of people. And then you know what's going to happen, Ian, don't you? When they are given these houses, us far rights are going to be going and throwing bricks through their windows.
Well, you see,
how is that going?
Exactly, and you see that's the sort of level of, I mean, the infuriation that locals, particularly those on a housing list, are going to feel. I get it. Vicky, I've got to move on for time, no other reason, but thank you for that. And you did hit on a really good point. I've talked about a mate of mine who, oddly, I'm going out for a bite to eat with tomorrow night, and his wife and a couple of others, not relevant, but just painted the picture here. And he's a guy that you would call, you know, Rupert Lowe would look at him and go, blimey, he's a bit right-wing, isn't he? He is very much on the right, but on the legit right. You know, he's not some weirdo with extreme, horrible views on things. But he'd always said, because of his job, and he has a pretty good job, that he kind of has to keep it low-lying. Is that the right phrase? Low-lying? Laying low? Yeah, a bit. Just keep it under the radar, because companies get a bit itchy if they think somebody is not necessarily right-wing, left-wing, but certainly if they think they're a bit right-wing. And he wouldn't describe himself as right-wing, by the way, just describe himself as bang in the centre of what the average person thinks. But the likes of Keir Starmer and probably Kemi Badenoch would go, oh, mate, you are well over there on the right. Now, his point is really simple, and that is that actually keeping this under the radar for so long has changed. He said he's now having more and more conversations with people who previously never engaged in the whole kind of immigration discussion, now are just coming out of the woodwork and going, do you know what? Yeah, there's an issue here. And in his experience, he's not a politician. He's just a guy with his head screwed on and a normal working class bloke who's done really well, shinned up the ladder and done really well. He says he said, the position I have is just the position most ordinary people have. It's not extreme. And now people are saying, feeling more comfortable at imparting their concerns. And I get it. Sam is in Hertfordshire. Sam, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hi. Yeah, basically, what I feel like I have to say that I've not been political in the past at all.
Yep.
I've never listened to talk radio. Like I told your researcher just now, somebody left this radio station on in one of the work vans, and I ended up listening to it. It was Jeremy Kyle.
Wow.
And,
there you go.
I actually sent him a message and said that I never thought I'd say this, but I'd vote for him if he started a party, because everything he was saying, and same with you and all your other presenters, there's like your tagline is the home of common sense. That could not be more true. You're saying what you're obviously not the voice of the nation, because there are people that oppose these views, but you are basically speaking for the majority of the nation, I feel, anyway.
I'd like to think so. And I bump into a lot of people on a regular basis, Sam. People come up and say hello on the train or in Tesco or wherever it happened to be. I was in the Tesco petrol forecourt the other day where a fella I had a chat with, I think his name was Stuart, and it was just really nice, just ordinary people, and this is exactly what we do here. It's about ordinary conversations that nearly everyone you meet who's sane agree on.
Oh, exactly. And everything I now know about political stuff is from listening to your radio from the last week, really. And
That's great.
I like I said, I voted for Labour because my family. I vote for whatever they tell me to vote for.
Yep.
And now I already know that I'm going to vote for Nigel Farage because of what he's saying. And I mean, even if he does become Prime Minister, most politicians, they lie and they get into power and they don't do what they promise they're going to do. Maybe Nigel Farage will be the same, but he can't do any worse than
well, indeed, and we've tried all the others, right? I mean, in different ways, whether they've been in, I mean, even the Lib Dems had a pop at it, didn't they, when they were in coalition? So we've given them all a good go, Sam.
But also, like, I'm probably going to forget most of the stuff I wanted to say. There's so much to discuss, but like where Nigel Farage said about building all these new prisons, and people are saying, "Oh, where's the money going to come from?" Well, you spent all our money on importing the Afghan migrants. You found the money for that. So the majority of the British public, even if you put out a poll and said, "Would you like us to spend your tax money on building prisons?" I think the most of us would say, "Yeah, go for it, mate."
100%.
Talking about the shoplifting, I was in a BP garage the other day, one that I use quite frequently, and just before I'd gone in, two men had gone in and filled up their bag and left. They took a load of food with them,
nice.
And apparently this is a twice or three times a week they do it, and the people that work in the BP garage, they're not allowed to touch them, obviously, neither are we as the public. If we tried to stop them, we probably face prosecution, and their employers told them that if they want to take a basket, you can give them a basket, so you don't get involved. It's absolutely insane.
That is absolutely insane. Listen, Sam, you raise a great point. I wish we had longer. Thank you. And lovely comments as well at the beginning. That is Sam in Hertfordshire. We're going to talk criminology in just a second. We've got a great guest coming on with us in just a few moments' time, Professor James Treadwell. He's got just an incredible CV. He's been in and around, one of the few around Belmarsh, up close and personal with some of the worst characters. Lots of projects over the years. The 2011 English riots, he's looked at that area, the role of the English Defence League. He crosses all sorts of different elements of criminal justice, societal and social behaviour. We'll chat to him in just a couple of moments. Keep it here, it's Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is indeed Talk, 25 to 4. Now, each week, as the more eagle-eyed and diligent audience out there will have noticed that in association with CrimeCon, the world's #1 true crime event, we've been delving into the minds of criminals and those who chase them and work around this area, from the psychology of offenders to forensic breakthroughs and the fight against wrongful convictions, bringing you gripping insights from some of the biggest names in true crime. This week we speak to one of the UK's leading criminologists who spent time inside high security prisons, up close and personal with those, what you might call, incredibly dangerous characters. Met some of the most notorious offenders in that respect, and isn't afraid to speak out on controversial issues facing the justice system today. Let's speak to the Professor of Criminology, University of Staffordshire. James Treadwell is with us. James, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian. Thank you very much for having me on.
It's a pleasure. So at what point in your life do you go, I think I'll be a criminologist? Because it sounds like a great gig to me.
It is a great gig.
Was it Agatha Christie that did it, or somebody like that?
No, not at all. I really did fall into it in some ways. I came from South Birmingham. I'd really never thought about going to university, and then it was sold to me at a time really as criminology sort of started to expand. I didn't perform particularly well at school. I came off a rough estate in South Birmingham and had a lot of contact there with offenders. And I sort of thought, well, maybe trying to understand this might be something that I could do. And really, I was very, very lucky. I studied criminology at a time where pretty much everybody who went to university to look at it wanted to join the police, and I didn't. I ended up moving into the National Offender Management Service, or what is now Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, when that was set up. Worked for them for a while, worked for the National Association for the Care and Resettlement of Offenders as well, and then kind of moved into criminology in the early 2000s to teach it. But it's given me all manner of opportunities to talk across a lot of the things that you've been talking about on your show today, from kind of, migration and crime and why people don't intervene now, through to how we should solve things. And it's kind of led me to a position where a lot of the time I get very frustrated about the way that debates play out and the things that are being said and the things that are being proposed. I noticed you mentioned just before we started to talk, for example, about the mess that our prison system is in, which reform have been suggesting. We really need to build our way out of. I agree, but it's a really long-term project to do. Yeah. What frustrates me, especially given the migration and crime link at the moment, is that no one in politics, for example, is suggesting, well, why don't we have more immigration removal centres, which are cheaper, take a lower category of offender, could be put up very, very quickly, and actually could deal with those people who are coming over here illegally and committing crimes while they're at liberty claiming asylum. Yeah.
I mean, that's fairly common sense stuff, but you wonder, and I've long wondered this when it comes to criminality, social justice, all these kind of areas that we're talking about here, James, that it's certainly the same in government, and it's certainly the same in most areas of politics. I think it's the same in academia as well. This kind of pervasive groupthink that sort of takes over every institution and every room and every role. They might differ slightly on a few things, but ultimately the status quo is retained and no one thinks outside the box.
Absolutely, and that is one of the reasons that we're in the problem that that we have the problems that we have at the moment. Mostly, the vast majority of people who are involved in criminal justice form up around the same sort of set of ideas and conventions and understandings. They're broadly left-leaning politically in terms of not necessarily economically left, but left in the sense that they're quite liberal. They generally don't want to restrict individual freedoms. They regard everybody as holding, the potential for good in them, which I think is pretty naive, actually. Human beings aren't necessarily born bad or good, but become what they are over time through a range of forces, some within them, some external on them. But most of the time, there's this kind of general tendency to think that most people are for the good and will be made that way if just given the right sort of structural chances. And the reality is, I think that, when you're talking about crime, particularly serious forms of crime, that's simply not the case. Not everybody thinks the same way. Not everybody looks at the world the same way. And an awful lot of the time, offenders are not going, no matter how much opportunity you give them, then they're not necessarily going to kind of play by the conventional rules of society and be nice, decent people.
100%. And it's, I don't know. I mean, we look at the multifarious kind of strands of this subject that are live at the moment, whether it's immigration, whether it's protest. I think that's an interesting area. I noted that you've certainly, you've looked and studied into the 2011 riots as well, and what's behind that. There's also that whole Venn diagram where class comes into this, which is an area I feel strongly about. I would imagine yourself, from a similar background to me, probably feel quite strongly about this as well. I mean, what do you make of this sort of, there's a sense of instability, there's a sort of there's some tumbleweed floating around the place out there. I hope I'm not projecting this onto the world, but certainly we're in a bit of a wobbly position as a society.
I think that's absolutely the case, and I think a lot of it comes from the kind of the moral, the moral framing from on high, which and what values are promoted in some ways. We live in a society now, I think, that's become incredibly kind of consumerist, where successes and the good life is largely, a prescribed route way that people have to make loads of money, be very sort of selfish and instrumental about how they elbow each other out of the way to get to the top. And that kind of creates a value system whereby, we're not necessarily talking about what's for the social good, what's for the benefit, what are, when in the past, historically, some of those kind of framings of debates under Blair about kind of rights and responsibilities, for example, the problem we see at the moment, I think, is we see a lot of corruption from on high to down low, and a lot of people, who are show an unwillingness to take responsibility for their own actions and their failings when they get things wrong. There's this kind of everybody is essentially kind of everybody apart from almost kind of a small strata of men, are ultimately not responsible for their own actions, but are simply cast in a direction by social forces that they have no control over. Choice is very undertalked. And when you said, for example, about class, if we go back and even we think about social class, and we know that disproportionately experiences of things like inequality do absolutely frame up where crime comes about in some ways in society. But at the same time, there are plenty of people who come from incredibly impoverished, disadvantaged backgrounds, who've had very, very little advantageous happen to them in their lives, but they follow the law and they don't break the law. They don't commit crimes.
And I was just going to say, just on top of that, I mean, the governments, will always say when we've had sort of riotous behaviour, and we've seen people go to jail for what they've done in terms of street protests, but also what they've done on social media as well. A government's worst nightmare is public disorder, right? I mean, it's the last thing in the world they want, and it's often said that those big prison sentences that were handed out, again, social media posts as well as behaviour in the street, sort of they happen, the sentences are disproportionate to what they might have been at any other time because of the message it's got to send. Now, 2011 also did that as well, didn't it? There were people who went to jail. There was one guy I think got 6 months for nicking some water back then. Is that a thing in the criminal justice world from your perspective, what you've looked at? Do judges do this or magistrates do this instinctively? Does a word come from above? What happens there?
Oh, certainly there are times where sentences are used, and sentencing is hardened to try and send a message out. Whether that works or not, it's one of the few places where actually I agree with a lot of criminologists. A lot of the time I don't. The evidence is that it's not that actually works. The real thing is the kind of certainty of being arrested and prosecuted in some ways. It's whether your actions will lead to consequences. A lot of the time, and one of the situations we're in at the moment as a society is we're moving into a society where very, very little crime is effectively prosecuted. Last year, the police cleared up around about 5.3% of all crime reported to them. Now it goes higher for some offences like murder, but for the most part, offenders know, their activity has little risk. That sends a message to the rest of society as well, which is partly why we're forming up into that now kind of low trust society.
Sure.
There are very, very low levels of trust generally. I think there's also a real frustration amongst people when they are following the kind of legitimate route and behaving in a conformist way, following the laws, and they see that the people who aren't at all are getting all the rewards. And this is certainly the same frustration that fuels the debate about migration, for example, and illegal immigration. People are coming over in boats and being put into hotels and given cards that they're using to gamble in casinos and working illegally. And one of the things that isn't being said a lot of the time is so much of that immigration debate is actually a crime debate. It is a crime debate, but we kind of don't see it as a crime debate. But it's one where the majority, the majority of legitimate people feel frustrated because nothing really sticks in the core, I think, of the British in terms of a kind of national identity than, an unwillingness to follow the rules, and the hypocrisy of people not kind of playing by the conventions and the standards. So, there is a kind of problem when the courts have, essentially got to a stage where they're delaying sentencing people, where prosecutions aren't going ahead for years, where the police aren't necessarily arresting, and we're not seeing the kind of results of a criminal justice system functioning. trust is falling away, so any kind of exemplary sentence then for public disorder, is not necessarily going to, it's not necessarily going to send out a long-term message. I think the thing that's really interesting, particularly about public disorder, is we had the 2011 riots, and that happened at a sort of disorderly period. There'd been a bubbling of disorder. And if we think about groups like the English Defence League, at the time, people very, very heavily critical of them and their methods. But you would also have to say, that they were much more profile in raising attention of grooming gangs and the inactivity of the authorities towards those than just about any other group. Not to suggest that there wasn't an awful lot of violence and problems associated with them as well, but they certainly did set a political agenda. The tendency from a lot of the kind of authoritarians on the liberal left is to go, no, you can't talk about these things. We're going to close this down. Only our way necessarily counts. And again, I think that people are growing increasingly frustrated, at what they regard as a sort of societal and social double standard.
Yeah, and you've been there yourself, haven't you, by sticking something on social media and, whether it's peers or others who've gone, oh, my goodness, you can't say that. And you made a very simple case about who should be in men's prisons, I think I'm right in saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly suffered a backlash in what was called the gender wars by saying, I think biological sex is real, and I don't think that we should put biological men in female prisons, and at the time, I think I was the first and still in some ways one of the only male criminologists to kind of come out and say that. Interestingly now, of course, it's very much the standpoint of the Supreme Court and where we sit, but again, it's that kind of difficult it's that difficult terrain where people don't necessarily speak out because there's a widespread sort of cultural injunction, in that you can't possibly say that. Of course, what academia should be doing is it should be raising this really
100%. I mean, and also what's really fascinating about this, I mean, it's where criminology and psychology kind of mix here is this is not even anything controversial. I mean, this is just basic stuff. If there was a book you could buy called Things That Aren't Controversial, this would be the first thing in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the time there is that, but there's been, as I say, there's been a very kind of narrowing of, and that in some ways, irrespective of which political party is in office,
sure.
but a narrowing towards that kind of quite liberal agenda, the kind of greater freedoms. Nobody wants, and like I say, although I'm using the term liberal to describe it, a lot of those people who are liberal are very, very authoritarian. So the way that they,
unbelievably.
Yes, I'm all for everybody's freedom until you disagree with my...
you disagree with me because my position is correct, and that's why I'm very evangelical and territorial about it. Listen, James, we have to stop there. We are going to let's speak again. It's been great having you on, James Treadwell. Thank you, Professor of Criminology, University of Staffordshire, and of course you will catch him if you're at CrimeCon. Remember, after a successful week in London, CrimeCon moves to Manchester, September the 27th this year. Lots going on there. And of course, if you've enjoyed today's episode, you can download and listen to all the Talk Crime podcasts on your favourite podcast app. We're back with more comment from you coming next on Talk.
a knock on the door and they asked me whether I'd visited Israel, and I said yes. They said at first that they were safeguarding officers. I thought I didn't know what it was about, and I said...
That must be very worrying to hear safeguarding officers. When you hear that, you think immediately you've done something wrong.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And they said it was about Israel, and I said, oh, well, my son didn't go. He stayed with my mum because they thought that I'd take my son to a war zone.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is 5:24. Peter Cardwell's here after the news at 4. We'll chat to him before then. Let's go to Phil in Preston. How you doing, Phil?
I'm fine, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good as gold. What have you got for us?
I'm just listening to you, and you're talking about the asylum seekers going in betting shops and spending the whatever.
Yeah. Previous person mentioned that.
Yeah, but what's the difference between that and the people who live here who are getting benefits? They can spend it on exactly the same, can't they? It's still coming out of our taxes, isn't it?
Well, indeed, yeah. You could argue that you could make the same case. It could be, maybe a little more jarring when it's somebody who's kind of come into the country illegally and doing it. That just perhaps gives it a new league. But, yeah, I take your point.
Yeah, because they haven't paid into the system, have they?
Say again?
They haven't paid into the system.
No, I've paid nothing into the system. Yeah, absolutely.
No.
You make a good point. Yeah, fair point. Phil, thank you very much indeed. Phil in Preston. That's a fair one, isn't it? I mean, if you haven't paid in, then it is a little more, it's an uncomfortable fit if you're out there gallivanting, love that word, gallivanting with the public funds, whether it's because you've legged it over here on a boat or you just don't go to work. Robert Taylor in Nottingham says, hats off to Professor James Treadwell. He was brilliant. Similarly, Alison in Billericay, James Treadwell made me think, what are these people really running away from and why are they so desperate not to go back? That they make up absolute nonsense in deportation trials. We definitely need immigration detention centres and we need them urgently. A lot of love for our last guest. We will get him back on with us because he had a lot to say on this issue, and he didn't come from, we touched on that thing of groupthink, which is this really kind of, I didn't even explain what it is, do I? But I would have thought by now it had been sufficiently talked about that it would have gone away a little bit. But within the world of politics and academia, education in particular, it's there and it sits there glowing like a tub of kryptonite, if you like. And it wrecks. It completely... It's a wrecking ball to intelligent and logical thinking. But the reason it's there is because it ultimately, it's not a conspiracy theory, it just makes everybody's job a bit easier. This one in from Margaret, who says, another 229 migrants yesterday. Starmer nowhere to be seen. It will never stop. Someone needs to ask him what he's doing to stop the boats and start putting the country first. He said it, didn't he? He said it, country first, party second. Nonsense. We're paying his wages. What a waste of space. P.S. Have a nice weekend, says Margaret. Yes, have a nice weekend too. This one, no name given. My husband is a hospital consultant and left the BMA due to the activism. When he was a junior doctor many years ago, he worked crazy hours and worked out that his pay rate was the lowest in the hospital when you considered it as an hourly rate. But he didn't care because ultimately it was his dream job and he made it through the ranks. Thank you very much indeed for that. Tim says, afternoon, Tim's in Suffolk. I've just crunched the numbers. The Doctor Talk interviewed earns 3 times a soldier who could be shot tomorrow. One here from Ruth. My son is a submariner. Under the sea, sometimes for weeks or months. Many doctors could never do that. Service to keep our country safe. However, that doesn't include stopping dinghies, of course. And that's a good point as well. So much comment on this. Peter Cargwell is here.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Laden with savoury delights.
Indeed. We've got a big talk exclusive coming up on the other side of the news. I can't tell you too much, but it's
Give us a little spoiler,
amuse
tiny
bouche.
spoiler, a little bit like a trailer for it.
Let's just say it's about a
tease me, Peter.
It's about a council that tried to cover up some very important information, and we've got a major development on that story. So we'll talk about that after the news.
Okay.
That's a talk exclusive coming in just a few minutes' time. We'll continue the conversation about Epping, of course, about other a second council as well that is saying that that is escorting people, police force escorting people. We'll talk about the NHS.